He tore the ultrasound photograph in half. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. Kang Mu-jin's hands moved with the same cold precision he used for everything else in his life. One clean rip, then another, until the image of his own unborn child lay in pieces on the floor of his 53rd floor penthouse. Zuri Amara Bell stood 3 feet away and watched it happen. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for the pieces. She just stood there with her hands pressed flat against her stomach, 10 weeks of life, growing underneath her palms, and looked at the man she had trusted with the most terrifying truth she had ever spoken out loud. He looked back at her like she was a stranger who had broken into his home. "Get out," he said. And that was the moment Zuri understood that some mistakes cannot be survived. If this story already has your heart in your throat, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell because the stories we tell here do not let go of you easily. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, and if you have ever loved someone who made you feel invisible-like, and stay with us. Because this one is for you. The night it started, everything started, Zuri had rehearsed the conversation 14 times on the train ride over. She had tried different versions, gentle openings, careful phrasing. She had even written notes on a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket, which she knew she would never use, but carried anyway the way people carry lucky charms that have already stopped working. By the time the elevator opened directly into Mu-jin's penthouse, the notes were damp from her sweating hands. He was standing at the window when she walked in. That was his default position. In the evenings facing the city, like he owned the view, which he basically did. Chicago spread out below him in every direction, and Mu-jin watched it the way a man watches something he has already decided belongs to him. He didn't turn around immediately. That was also typical. Not cruelty, exactly. Just the habit of a man who had spent 40 years operating in rooms where everyone waited for him. "You're early," he said. "I need to tell you something." He turned then. Something in her voice, she would think about this later. Lying awake in her apartment at 3 in the morning, something in her voice must have registered, because the small, private expression he kept only for her appeared briefly on his face. The one that made him look younger, less like the person his employees feared. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." He waited. Zuri reached into her jacket and pulled out the ultrasound photograph. She had held it so many times in the past week that the edges had softened. She crossed the room and placed it on the table between them without saying a word. Mu-jin looked at it. He didn't pick it up immediately. He studied it from a distance, the way he studied contracts, searching for the clause that would complicate everything. Then he picked it up, held it toward the light. The silence lasted long enough that Zuri's carefully rehearsed sentences completely dissolved. 10 weeks, she said. "I found out 3 weeks ago. I waited because I needed to be sure, and then I needed to figure out how to—" "That's not possible." His voice was completely flat. "Mu-jin, I told you." He set the photograph down on the table. "I told you, explicitly before I cannot have children." The doctors were certain. I have had the same answer from 3 different specialists over 14 years. "I know what you told me. Then you understand why this isn't possible." Zuri felt her jaw tighten. She had prepared for shock. She had prepared for fear, even for anger. What she had not prepared for was this, the clinical precision of a man who had already decided the evidence was fraudulent. "I'm 10 weeks pregnant," she said. "The ultrasound is real. The heartbeat is real. I am standing in your living room, telling you the truth." "You're telling me something." He picked up the photograph again. This time, his hands were very still, and that stillness was worse than anything else, worse than if he'd thrown something or raised his voice. "You're telling me a story that requires me to believe a medical impossibility. Or it requires you to consider that 14 years is a long time, and medicine isn't always permanent." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and what she saw in his face was not the man she had spent 4 months learning, the one who sent her messages at midnight asking whether she'd eaten, the one who had once sat with her for 2 hours on his kitchen counter talking about her grandmother. What she saw was Kang Mu-jin the way the rest of the world saw him. Closed, calculating, completely unreachable. How long have you been planning this? He asked. The question hit her like cold water. Planning, you knew my position. You knew my history. If you believed you were carrying someone else's child and you wanted security, you would have known that. Zuri stepped back. She couldn't help it. It was a physical reaction, her body, rejecting the sentence before her mind had fully processed it. Stop talking, she said. He kept going. I'm not interested in judgment. I'm asking a practical question. If someone advised you that the timing and circumstances made me a viable... Stop. Her voice cracked on the word. She hadn't meant for it to. Stop talking. Right now. Stop, he stopped. The room was very quiet. 40 stories below, Chicago moved away. It always moved relentless and indifferent. Zuri picked up the ultrasound photograph from the table. Then she held it out to him. Take it, she said. Look at it. It's your child, Mu-jin. I have never been with anyone else. Not for the entire time I've known you, and not before. Not for it doesn't matter. Look at the photograph. He took it from her hand. He looked at it, and then with no warning, no pause, no visible emotion crossing his face, he tore it in half. Zuri did not sleep that night. She sat on the floor of her bathroom with her back against the tub because the tile was cold, and the cold was something real to hold on to when everything else felt like it was dissolving. She had her phone in her lap, and she had almost called her mother 4 times. But her mother would want to know everything, and Zuri wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Saying it out loud would make it a story she would have to carry for the rest of her life. She was 27 years old and alone and pregnant, and the man who had torn up her baby's first photograph had looked at her like she was a problem he was solving. She sat on that bathroom floor until the sky started getting lighter. Then she got up, washed her face, put on her scrubs, and went to work. Because children at Mercy, Children's Hospital in Chicago, did not care what happened in penthouses the night before. They needed their nurses present and steady, and Zuri Amara Bell had never once given a child a reason to doubt her steadiness. That was the part of herself she had always been certain about. Nursing had not been the plan. The original plan, the one her father had carefully outlined on a yellow legal pad when Zuri was 15, involved medical school and eventually a residency in pediatric surgery. Her father was an engineer who approached every problem, including his daughter's future, with sequential logic and thorough documentation. The plan collapsed in Zuri's second year of pre-med when her father had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side, and suddenly the family needed income more urgently than it needed a future surgeon. Zuri switched programs, finished her nursing degree in 3 years instead of 4, joined Mercy Children's at 23, and discovered genuinely and without any romantic self-delusion that she was good at it in a way that felt like a calling rather than a compromise. She was good with the children who screamed. She was good with the ones who went silent, which was actually harder. She was good with panicked parents at midnight, and with delivering news that no parent should ever have to receive, and with standing in doorways after the worst possible conversations, and somehow finding something true and useful to say. She had always assumed that steadiness was something she'd been born with. It took Kang Mu-jin to teach her that it was something she'd been building one shift, one crisis, one held hand at a time, specifically because her own life required it. She met him because of a parking garage. Specifically because of a parking garage at 10:15, at night when Zuri had just finished a double shift, and the elevator was out, and her feet hurt, and she was carrying 2 bags of groceries and a tote full of medical textbooks for the certification exam she kept rescheduling. He was standing next to a black car on the 4th level, talking on the phone in Korean, and she walked past him 3 times, because she couldn't remember where she'd parked. The 3rd time she walked past, he ended his call. "You've passed this car 3 times, he said. His English was precise, slightly formal. The accent was there but controlled. My car is somewhere on this floor. What does it look like? Gray Honda, older. He looked at her for a moment, not the way men usually looked at her in parking garages, which was something she was always hyper-aware of, but with what seemed like genuine assessment. I've been standing here for 11 minutes, he said. There's a gray Honda at the far end, near the stairwell. It was here when I arrived. She walked to the end of the row. There it was. She had walked past it twice. She was putting the groceries in the trunk when she heard his footsteps behind her, and every instinct she had sharpened. "I'm not following you," he said, reading the situation correctly. "My driver is late. I wanted to make sure you found the car." She turned around, looked at him properly for the first time. He was tall, well-dressed in a way that wasn't showy, the kind of clothing that didn't advertise itself but cost more than her monthly rent. His face was angular and serious, somewhere in his late 30s, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had spent years learning not to show what he was thinking. "I found it," she said. "I see that." She closed the trunk. He didn't move closer, didn't try to extend the conversation, didn't offer a card or a name. She was halfway to the driver's door when she stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for the parking help." He nodded once. That was all. She drove home thinking that was the strangest 11 seconds of any conversation she'd had in months. She saw him again 2 weeks later. Same parking garage, different level. She had a different shift ending that night, earlier, and she came around a corner on level 3 and almost walked directly into him. He caught her by the elbow, instinctive, not aggressive, just keeping her from stumbling into his chest. "You work here," he said. "The hospital." "Yes." She looked at him. "Do you?" "I'm here regularly. Business." She didn't ask what business. People at Mercy Children's had business for all kinds of reasons, and she had learned early in her career not to ask questions she hadn't been invited to ask. "Then I'll probably keep running into you," she said. Probably. She went to her car. He went to his. Later she would mark that conversation as the beginning of something, though at the time it felt like nothing at all. The third time was in the hospital cafeteria at 7 in the morning. She was eating a mediocre breakfast sandwich and reading notes for her certification exam. And he sat down across from her, at the only available table in a crowded room, and he asked if she minded. She minded slightly, but she was also trying to appear like someone who had her life fully under control, so she said no. He had coffee and didn't eat. He was also reading something documents in a leather folder, and for the first 40 minutes, they occupied the same table without exchanging a word, which was somehow less uncomfortable than it should have been. "What are you studying?" he asked eventually. "Pediatric critical care certification." "Is it difficult?" She looked up. Why would someone ask that? Curiosity. She looked back at her notes. Yes, it's difficult. He went back to his documents. She went back to her notes. Another 15 minutes passed. "The sandwich is terrible," she said. "Just so you know, if you ever consider it." He looked at the sandwich. "I'll remember that." She left first. He nodded when she stood up. She didn't think about him again for 3 days. Then she did think about him, and couldn't quite explain why. What developed between them over the following weeks was something that Zuri consistently refused to define too precisely, partly because she was not someone who needed everything named immediately, and partly because naming it would require her to decide what she was doing. They talked in the cafeteria when their schedules aligned. He gave her his phone number, plainly, without performance, saying only that if she wanted to continue the conversations outside the building, she could. She saved the number and didn't use it for 9 days. When she finally texted him, it was 11:30 at night, after a shift that had included one child who didn't make it, and she typed only, "I had a terrible day." "Do you talk on the phone or only in person?" He called her immediately. They talked for 2 hours. She didn't tell him about the child. She talked about everything around it, what it meant to do a job that required her to hold the weight of other people's worst moments without putting it down. He listened in a way most people didn't, without rushing toward advice or reassurance, just listening until she'd said everything there was to say. When she asked him what he did for work, really asked, not politely, he was quiet for a moment. "Shipping," he said. "Cargo, maritime logistics, international contracts." "That sounds complicated." "It is." "Is there a reason you're at Mercy Children's regularly?" Another pause, shorter. "I support the hospital financially. I attend board meetings quarterly." She should have asked more questions. Looking back, she always noted that. She should have pressed on the edges of that answer, where the real story lived. Instead, she asked, "Do you have children?" The pause this time was different. Longer. With a specific texture she didn't know how to read yet. No, he said. Do you want them? That question isn't one I've been able to answer the same way twice. It wasn't a real answer. She accepted it anyway, and thought about it for a long time afterward. 4 months. That was how long they had between the parking garage and the penthouse and the torn photograph. 4 months of quiet dinners after midnight when his schedule finally cleared. 4 months of conversations that went places. Zuri hadn't expected his childhood in Busan, her grandmother's kitchen in Atlanta, the specific grief of being good at a job that regularly broke your heart. 4 months of the private Mu-jin, the one he kept behind every professional wall he'd ever constructed, who was careful and occasionally funny and capable of a tenderness that felt almost painful to witness because it was so clearly unfamiliar to him. She fell in love with that version of him. That was the part she didn't say, out loud, to herself until much later she had completely fallen for a man who had shown her only half of what he was. The other half arrived at the penthouse the night she told him about the pregnancy. She told her best friend Aliyah the morning after. Aliyah was a social worker who had the particular gift of being able to hear catastrophic news without performing any of the expected reactions. She sat across from Zuri in Zuri's small kitchen and drank her coffee and let Zuri get through the whole story without interrupting. When Zuri finished, Aliyah put her mug down. He tore it up. Yes, he tore up the ultrasound of his own baby. He doesn't believe it's his. Aliyah was quiet for a moment. And what do you need from me right now? Because I can do several different things, and I want to make sure I do the right one. This was why Zuri loved Aliyah, not comfort as a default. Always the question first. I need to not be talked out of what I've already decided, Zuri said. Which is, I'm keeping the baby. I'm not asking him for anything. I'm not going back to that building. Aliyah nodded slowly. Okay. You're not going to tell me I should give him a chance to explain? Did he explain? He implied I had deliberately tried to. Zuri stopped. Even saying it made something cold move through her chest. He implied I might have chosen him specifically because of his resources. That I might have planned this. Aliyah picked up her coffee mug. Set it back down without drinking. No, she said. I'm not going to tell you to give him a chance to explain. They sat together for another hour. Zuri didn't cry once. She was saving it for when she was alone, which she'd been doing since she was 9 years old, and had decided that crying in front of people cost something she wasn't always willing to spend. 3 months passed. Zuri entered her second trimester. Her body changed in ways she had expected from nursing school, and in ways that surprised her anyway, the specific weight of it, the way her center of gravity shifted, the exhaustion that was nothing like regular tiredness, and everything like her body was conducting major construction, while she tried to live normally inside it. She told her parents. Her mother cried. Her father asked 4 practical questions and then said quietly, "Whatever you need, baby." That's all. She did not hear from Mu-jin. She assumed she wouldn't. She prepared for a life in which he remained the story she would eventually have to tell their child, the full story, without omission, at an age when their daughter or son was ready to understand it. She thought about that sometimes. What version of events would be true and honest without being a wound she was passing directly into a child's hands? She didn't have an answer yet. She figured she had time. Then, on a Tuesday evening in October, she walked out of Mercy Children's into a cold wind off the lake, and there was a black sedan parked at the curb. She recognized it. She kept walking. The door opened. Mu-jin stepped out. He looked different. Not in any way she could immediately catalog, same heights, same bearing, same clothes, that cost more than they announced. But his face. Something in his face had shifted in 3 months, and she couldn't name it yet, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Zuri, she stopped walking. She did not turn around. I have nothing to say to you, she said, to the sidewalk ahead of her. I know, his voice was careful, not rehearsed careful. There was a difference. I'm not here to ask you to listen. I just need 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You asked me to get out of your home. Yes, then you've already used your 5 minutes. She started walking again. I was wrong. She stopped. The wind came off the lake and moved through the bare trees lining the street. A bus passed. Somewhere a car horn. Chicago being Chicago, merciless and constant. Zuri stood completely still on that sidewalk. She had imagined this. She had spent 3 months telling herself she hadn't imagined this, and she had imagined it anyway. The specific words, the specific moment, whether she would feel relief or fury or something she didn't have a name for yet. What she actually felt, standing there with her back to Kang Mu-jin, was tired. Not the construction site exhaustion of pregnancy. A different kind. The kind that comes from spending 3 months not letting yourself fall apart. She turned around. He looked at her. His eyes dropped to her stomach, the visible evidence of the months that had passed, and something moved through his face that she filed away without deciding what to do with it yet. New medical tests, he said. My physician specialist. 3 weeks ago, he paused. My fertility returned. Apparently, this is possible in cases like mine, when the details don't matter. What matters is that it's documented. It's real. Zuri looked at him. You came here, she said, to tell me that a medical test confirmed what I told you 3 months ago. Yes, a medical test. Her voice was very level. Not my word. Not my face when you tore up that photograph. A test. He held her gaze. He didn't look away, which she noted. Mu-jin was a man who could hold a room with complete stillness, and right now that stillness looked like it was costing him something. Yes, he said again, I understand what that means. I understand what it means that I needed not Kitane instead of my... Go home, she said. Zuri, I heard you. I noted it. Go home. She turned and walked to her car. Her hands were completely steady. She sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. A sound like Chicago traffic. Then she pulled out into Chicago traffic, and the city swallowed her up the way it always did. An enormous. And she drove home to the apartment where her baby was growing quietly inside her, needing nothing from Kang Mu-jin except, eventually, the truth. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach at a red light. We're okay, she said quietly. We're still okay. The light changed. She drove. He called her 4 times in the 3 days after the sidewalk. She didn't answer once. On the 5th day, she turned her phone over on the break room table and stared at the ceiling for a while. And Aliyah, who had stopped by the hospital with food that was significantly better than anything the cafeteria offered, Tiri, watched her do it without saying anything for almost a full minute. He's not stopping, Zuri finally said. Did you think he would? Honestly? Yes. He's a man who runs an empire. He has approximately 10,000 other things demanding his attention. She turned the phone back over. 4 missed calls, no voicemails. Mu-jin apparently was not a man who left voicemails. I thought I'd be easier to abandon than to pursue. Aliyah unwrapped her food. Maybe that's what he thought, too. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be accurate. Zuri ate. The food was good. Aliyah always found the good places. It was an almost supernatural gift. And outside break room window, Chicago was doing its late October thing. Gray sky, leaves guttered against the windows. The lake somewhere, in the distance, making everything colder. If I talk to him, Zuri said, that's not forgiveness. Obviously. I just want to be clear about that. For myself. You're clear, Aliyah said. You've been clear about it for 3 months. What you're less clear about is what you actually want to happen. Zuri didn't answer that, partly because Aliyah was correct, and partly because the honest answer, the one she hadn't spoken out loud, even to herself, at 3 in the morning on the bathroom floor, was more complicated than she wanted to deal with in a hospital break room on a Tuesday. She picked up her phone and called him back. He answered on the first ring. I'm not forgiving you, she said. I want that stated plainly before anything else. Understood. And I'm not interested in explanations that are dressed up as apologies. If you want to talk, you say what you mean, and I'll decide whether it's worth my time. A pause. When I have Thursday off, 1 hour. Public place. All right. And Mu-jin. She waited until the silence on his end had a specific quality to it, listening. The way he sometimes did. If you insult me again the way you insulted me in that penthouse, there won't be a second conversation. There won't be anything. I will make every decision about this child's life without you in it, and I will be completely fine. Another pause. Longer. I know you will, he said. It was the right answer. She hated a little bit that it was the right answer. Thursday, she said, and hung up. Splitting. She chose a coffee shop in Lincoln Park that she'd been going to for years, worn wooden tables, a counter where the same two people had worked every Thursday morning for as long as she could remember. The specific smell of coffee and old wood that she associated with studying and processing and making decisions she wasn't ready to make. She arrived 7 minutes early and ordered tea because caffeine was complicated now. And she sat in a chair facing the door because she had worked in a pediatric ward long enough that her brain automatically positioned her where she could see exits. Mu-jin came in exactly on time. He was alone, which she noted. No security visible, no entourage. He was wearing a dark coat, and he looked around the room until he found her, and then he walked to the table and sat down across from her with the careful, measured movement of a man who was monitoring himself closely. He looked at her stomach before he looked at her face. She watched him do it. "I'm 5 months," she said. "In case you were trying to do the math. I wasn't trying to hide that I was looking." "I know. I'm telling you anyway." The server came. Mu-jin ordered coffee black, and when the server left, he folded his hands on the table and looked directly at Zuri with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between deliberate composure and something rawer underneath it that he hadn't quite managed to contain. "Say what you came to say," Zuri told him. "I don't know how to do this," he said. She had not expected that to be the first sentence. She kept her face neutral. "Do what this?" A pause. "Sit across from someone I've damaged and not have a solution. I fix things. That's how I've operated for 20 years. There's a problem, there are steps, and the steps eliminate the problem. I don't know how to sit here and tell you that what I did cannot be fixed and simultaneously ask you to let me try." Zuri wrapped her hands around her mug. The tea was too hot, but she held it anyway, something to focus on. That wasn't his face. "You didn't just doubt the pregnancy," she said. "You could have doubted the pregnancy. You could have said, I need to get tested, I need to verify. Give me time to process this medically. That would have been hard. It would have hurt, but I could have understood it." She set the mug down. "You looked at me and concluded that I had planned it, that I had selected you specifically and deliberately as a target. You looked at 4 months of what we were to each other, and you decided I was capable of that." Mu-jin was very still. "Yes," he said. "Don't agree with me to agree with me." "I'm not." His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm telling you that you're describing exactly what I did, and I'm not going to argue about the shape of it. You're right. I didn't just doubt a medical fact. I accused you of something that I had no basis for. I had fear, and I used it like a weapon." Zuri looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Not the medical part. I understand the medical part. 14 years of being told something, and then someone presents you with evidence that contradicts it. I'm a nurse. I understand cognitive resistance. I'm asking why you went immediately to that. Why was the first conclusion your mind reached that I was running a con?" Mu-jin picked up his coffee, put it back down without drinking. "Because in my world," he said slowly, "that is always the first conclusion. Because I have spent 20 years in an environment where every offer of trust is a vector for exploitation, and I have survived by assuming the worst of every person's motivations, until they prove otherwise." He paused. "You were the first person in a very long time who I had stopped applying that to. And the moment I gave you something that frightened you, it came back." He said it flatly, not as an excuse. Just as a fact he was holding up to light. "All of it came back, and I used it on you. On you specifically, the person I had specifically chosen not to use it on." The coffee shop made its quiet sounds around them. Someone ordered something complicated at the counter. A child at a nearby table knocked a cup over, and the mother caught it before it fell. Zuri watched the mother catch the cup. "I need you to understand something," Zuri said. "I'm not building a case for you right now. I'm not deciding anything about forgiveness or about what happens next with the baby. I'm telling you what it cost me, because you should know what it cost me." "I know what—" "No," she said, with enough edge that stopped. "You know the outline. You don't know the specifics. And I'm going to tell you the specifics, and you're going to sit there and listen to all of them." He said nothing. He nodded once. "I walked back to my car that night," Zuri said, "and I sat in the driver's seat, and I told myself I was fine. I drove home, and I told myself I was fine. I sat on my bathroom floor until 5 in the morning, and I told myself I was fine. Because that is what I have been doing, that since I was 9 years old. Making myself fine, because other people need me to be fine, and I have never once figured out a different way to get through things. Her voice stayed level. That was its own kind of violence, the damage she'd absorbed, so thoroughly it had become composure. I went to work the next day because children needed me. I've gone to work every day for 3 months because children need me. I've built a plan for this baby, completely alone, because she needs me. Yes, the anatomy scan is scheduled for next month, and I have not asked you for a single thing because I will not give you the power to deny me. Something crossed Mu-jin's face when she said she. A visible thing uncontained, gone quickly, she said. I don't know yet, I said she, because that's what I say when I think about her. Zuri held his gaze. Don't do that. Don't make this about the gender. I'm still talking. I'm sorry. And to his credit, he meant it. She could hear it in the way his voice changed register, dropping the formality. Continue. I'm not asking you to carry what it cost me, Zuri said. I'm asking you to know about it. Because if we are going to have any conversation about what comes next, I need you to be operating with accurate information about what your actions actually did. Not a version you've softened for yourself. The actual version. Mu-jin was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. The actual version is, you made me feel like nothing I was, or anything I'd given you was real enough to matter when it actually counted. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't go away because someone passes a medical test. I know. Then what do you want from me, Mu-jin? Concretely. What are you asking for? He looked at her across the table. Something in his posture shifted not defensively. More like a man who had rehearsed one version of this conversation and was now abandoning the script because the real thing was different. I want to be part of the pregnancy, he said. I want to be at the appointments. I want to know what is happening, and I want the child to know me. Not because I can provide things, though I can and will. Because he stopped. Zuri waited. Because I destroyed the first photograph, he said. And I put it back together. The pieces. After you left that night, I went back and I collected every piece off the floor, and I taped them together. And I have had it for 3 months, and I don't know what to do with that, except tell you that I knew almost immediately that I had made the worst mistake of my life. The coffee shop went on around them. Zuri looked at her tea. She thought about the photograph, the torn pieces, the image of her 10-week ultrasound she had held for a week before finding the courage to bring it to him. The idea of him on the floor of his penthouse collecting the pieces. She didn't let it move her. Not yet. She stored it. I'm not giving you my forgiveness because you felt guilty, she said. That's not how this works. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? A chance to show you something different. Zuri considered that for a long time. Long enough that the server came back, asked if they needed anything, and left again. I'm going to tell you what I will and won't accept, she finally said. And you're going to listen to every word. And then you're going to tell me honestly whether you can live inside those terms. Not whether you want to, whether you actually can. Mu-jin said nothing, which was the correct answer. I make my own decisions, Zuri said. About my body, my work, my life, and this baby. I consult with you because she will be yours too. But consultation is not permission. I don't need your approval and I will not behave as though I do. She met his eyes. I keep my apartment. I keep my career. I keep my friendships and my family and my independence, and your money does not change any of that. If you try to use resources to manufacture obligation, the way you tried with the loans and the apartment and whatever that education fund was, I will reverse it myself, and we will be done. Something shifted in his expression at the mention of those things. You knew about all of that, he said. My student loans mysteriously disappeared 2 weeks after you showed up at the hospital. My apartment received a purchase notification addressed to my name for a building I definitely cannot afford. So yes, I knew. Mu-jin looked like he was deciding whether to defend the impulse. He chose not to. Smart. I'm going to reverse all of it, he said. I know. Because I'm asking you to, and you said you wanted to show me something different, and reversing those transactions is the first concrete evidence of whether that's true or whether it's something you're saying. He took out his phone. Right there at the table, he made 2 calls. Brief ones. In Korean, but Zuri caught enough of the registered direct, unambiguous instructions to understand that something was being undone in real time. He put the phone away. Done, he said. She watched his face. He did not look like a man performing sacrifice. He looked like a man who had received correction and accepted it. That was different. She noted it without deciding what it meant yet. I want to attend the anatomy scan, he said, if you'll allow it. I'll consider it. What will help you consider it? Time, she said. And you not calling me 4 times in 3 days. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something self-aware and a little rueful that she had also noted before, that rare expression that meant he recognized himself clearly and didn't much like what he saw. The flowers, he said. I'll stop the flowers. She looked at him. Keep the flowers, she said after a moment. Then she gathered her coat. One conversation doesn't change anything, Mu-jin. I know. I mean that literally. Don't mistake the fact that I'm still sitting here for progress. I'm here because this baby deserves a mother who tried every reasonable thing before closing a door permanently. I understand. She stood up. He stood with her, the reflex of someone who had absorbed certain courtesies so deeply they operated below conscious thought. I'll be in touch, she said. She walked out into the Lincoln Park cold. The wind off the lake hit her immediately, sharp and salt-tinged, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her eyes closed. She didn't feel better. She didn't feel worse. She felt like someone who had walked into a dark room and found the light switch, but hadn't decided yet whether she actually wanted to see what was in there. 3 weeks later, she let him come to the prenatal appointment. She did not tell him she was doing this, because she'd lain awake for 4 nights running the alternatives through her head with the methodical exhaustion of someone who was very good at assessing situations and deeply tired of this particular one. She told him the appointment details in a text message that was 7 words long. Thursday, 2 p.m. Northwestern. Don't be late. He wasn't late. He was, in fact, already in the waiting room when she arrived, which she had not anticipated, and which momentarily irritated her before she decided it wasn't worth the energy. He stood when she came in, said nothing, sat back down when she did. The waiting room was crowded, other pregnant women, a few partners, a grandmother knitting something enormous and yellow in the corner. Muzak version of something that had been a real song once. The specific anxiety of medical waiting rooms, low-grade and ambient. Mu-jin sat beside her with his hands folded in his lap and said nothing. Which was, unexpectedly, the correct thing to do. A woman across from them had a toddler on her knee who was methodically dismantling a board book. The toddler looked at Mu-jin with the frank evaluation that only very small children and very dangerous people can get away with. Mu-jin looked back at the toddler. The toddler offered him a torn page. Hyun, the mother said, mortified. It's all right, Mu-jin said. He took the page from the toddler with the careful hands of a man who was not used to being offered things by people with sticky fingers and held it for a moment, then offered it back. The toddler decided it was boring and looked away. Zuri watched this exchange from her peripheral vision. You don't have experience with children, she said quietly. No, that was obvious. Also true. You're going to need some. He said nothing. She could feel him sitting with that, not defensively, just sitting with it, which was another thing she noted. When the nurse called her name, Mu-jin stood without being invited, and she didn't tell him to sit back down. He walked into the examination room, and Zuri got situated, with the practiced ease of someone who had been to enough of these appointments to know the choreography, and the doctor came in, and the cold gel went on, and the transducer moved, and then the room filled with a sound. The heartbeat, fast and steady and completely merciless in its reality. Zuri had heard it before. She knew what it sounded like. She had prepared herself, or thought she had, for the difference between hearing it alone and hearing it with someone else in the room. She looked at Mu-jin. He had gone absolutely still. Not the controlled stillness of a boardroom. Something different. Something that went through the controlled stillness and came out the other side into something unguarded and exposed. He was looking at the monitor with an expression she had never seen on his face, not in 4 months of private dinners, not on the sidewalk outside the hospital, Not at the coffee shop 3 weeks ago. His hands, resting at his sides, were trembling, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, trembling. Kang Mu-jin, who could silence a room with a look, who had spent 20 years operating in an environment where showing weakness was an invitation to be standing in a Northwestern medicine examination room with his hands shaking because he could hear his child's heartbeat. The child he had convinced himself for 14 years was impossible. The child he had tried to destroy the first evidence of. Alive and loud and absolutely real, Zuri looked back at the monitor. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. When it was over the measurements, the doctor's questions, the appointment logistics, they walked back out into the hallway, and Mu-jin stopped just outside the door and stood with his back against the wall and exhaled once, controlled, and then again, less controlled. She sounds healthy, Zuri said. Yes. The doctor is pleased with the development. Yes. He looked at her. I know you haven't made any decisions. I know this doesn't mean Mu-jin. Yes. Stop talking for a minute. He stopped. The hallway moved around them, nurses, patients, a cart with equipment being wheeled somewhere important. Regular hospital sounds, which Zuri found grounding in the way she always had, since she'd spent most of her adult life inside buildings that smelled like antiseptic and ran on controlled urgency. When I found out I was pregnant, she said, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 40 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to drive. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. Exactly. I just couldn't. The size of it was too large to fit inside a normal Tuesday afternoon. She looked at him. I just wanted you to know I understand something about what just happened to you in that room. He held her gaze. I will not waste what just happened in that room, he said. Not as a promise designed to move her. More like a statement of intent he was making to himself in her presence. She believed him. She didn't want to believe him. Particularly, belief was a door she had been very careful about, but she believed that sentence the way she believed things she had tested against her own experience. I want to talk about a co-parenting arrangement, she said. Formal, legal, in writing, with my own attorney. Of course, equal parental authority, not supervised by you or managed by you. Equal, yes, and explicit protections for my independence. Financial, legal, residential. I'll have my attorney contact yours to begin the framework. I don't have an attorney. I'll retain one for you. Independent of mine, no conflict of interest, full representation. She studied him. That's the second time you've offered resources without conditions, she said. I'm paying attention, he said. She almost smiled. Almost, I'll call you this week, she said, about the co-parenting framework. All right, she walked toward the elevator. He didn't follow. She pressed the button and waited, and when the doors opened, she stepped in and turned around. And he was still standing against the wall in the hallway, watching her go. The doors closed. Zuri rode down alone and thought about the sound of the heartbeat and the way his hands had shaken. And she thought about all the reasons that changed nothing, and all the reasons it changed something. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, she had not resolved it in either direction, which was honest, which was the only thing she was willing to be right now. The arrangement took 2 weeks to draft. Her attorney, a fiercely efficient woman named Patricia Osi, who had been doing family law in Chicago for 22 years and regarded the Kang name the way she regarded most powerful names, with precise neutrality, went through every clause with Zuri across 3 separate meetings and told her flatly which sections Mu-jin's side had pushed for and which ones she'd pushed back. He agreed to everything, Patricia said, during the 3rd meeting, with the tone of someone who found this professionally noteworthy. Everything? The equal authority clause, the residential independence provision, the financial disclosure requirements. There was minor language negotiation on the notification timeline for major decisions, but nothing substantive. She set down the document. In 22 years, I have never seen a man with his resources accept these terms without a single significant counter. Zuri looked at the document. He's paying attention, she said, mostly to herself. He is, Patricia said. Whether that means what you want it to mean is a different question. It was a different question. Zuri had been living inside that different question for weeks. She signed. The week after the agreement was finalized, Mu-jin did something she had not expected. She found out about it from Aliyah, who sent her a link at 7 in the morning with no text, just the link, which was a protocol. Aliyah reserved for things that were significant enough to require no commentary. It was a business press release from Kang Meridian Shipping. The CEO, Kang Mu-jin, had issued a public statement confirming that he was expecting a child later in the year and was looking forward to this new chapter. That was all it said. 4 sentences. Corporate, formal, completely bloodless in the way press releases always were. But Zuri read it, sitting on her couch at 7 in the morning in her apartment, which was still hers, which Mu-jin had removed his financial claim on within 24 hours of her asking, and something shifted inside her chest that she had to spend a while cataloging. For 4 months, she had been a secret, not because she had accepted it, because she had not fully understood what she was accepting when she agreed to the late-night dinners and the unlisted phone calls and the consistent, gentle redirection every time she asked anything about his public life. She had told herself, a powerful man, a complicated business, he has reasons. She had told herself it was caution and not concealment. She had been wrong about that, and she had never had the chance to say it to him directly, not the way it deserved to be said. He had made it a non-issue before she could. That was either a very sophisticated manipulation or a genuine reckoning. She was still deciding which. She called him. He answered on the second ring this time. I saw the statement, she said. I assumed you would. It's 4 sentences. Yes, it doesn't mention my name. I didn't think I had the right to include it without your permission. She stood up from the couch, walked to the window. The city outside was November gray, and a few people were moving on the sidewalk below with the particular hunched urgency of people who had underestimated the wind. If you want to include my name, she said, you can include my name. Silence on the line. Not his normal silence, which was controlled and deliberate. This one had a different texture, like something had shifted weight somewhere. Are you sure? He said. I'm not doing it for you, she said. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being managed into invisibility, even by people who think they're protecting me. She paused. And because she deserves parents who aren't ashamed of each other. He was quiet for another moment. I was never ashamed of you, he said. I know that's true now, she said. It didn't feel true before. She heard him exhale. I'll have the statement updated today. Fine, Zuri. He paused. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret it. She hung up, stood at the window. Downstairs, someone opened an umbrella against the November wind, and it immediately inverted. A sound. The person stood there for a moment holding a broken umbrella in the Chicago cold with the resigned expression of a person who had simply accepted that the city was going to be what it was going to be. Zuri understood that entirely. 3 days later, Mu-jin received information during a dinner that changed his face. They had been carefully, provisionally, with the specific caution of 2 people navigating a newly coastline and still dangerous coastline, having occasional dinners. Not the late-night penthouse dinners of before. Public restaurants. Her choice of location. A schedule she controlled. This particular dinner was at a Thai place in Wicker Park that Zuri loved because it was loud enough that private conversations felt genuinely private, and the food was the kind of good that reminded her that eating was sometimes actually a pleasure. They had been talking not about the pregnancy, not about the legal framework, just talking, the way they had once talked at midnight in his kitchen when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. The change was immediate and total. Something drained from his face, not color exactly, but something behind it. The particular quality of a man who has received information his body is processing faster than his control can manage. He stood up. I need to make a call, he said. Mu-jin, please stay at the table. His voice had changed. Not the Mu-jin she'd been having dinner with. The other one. The one she'd glimpsed in the penthouse. I need you to do something for me right now. In about 90 seconds, a man named Baek Jun-seo is going to come to this table. He works for me. He's completely trustworthy. I need you to go with him immediately. What? Please. And there was something in that word, not the performance of vulnerability, but the actual stripped-down reality of it.
I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes and I will explain everything.
But right now, I need you to leave this restaurant. Her pulse had changed. She was aware of it clinically, the nurse part of her registering elevated heart rate, adrenaline response, threat assessment. The other part of her was already scanning the room. "Who's watching this restaurant?" she said. His jaw tightened. "Someone who knows exactly where you are," he said, "and who you are, and what you are to me." The air in the room felt different suddenly. This was the moment Zuri understood not abstractly but concretely, in her body, in the cold certainty of it that Mu-jin's world was not a metaphor for danger. It was actual danger, and she was in it, and the child she was carrying was in it. And the man standing across from her at a table in a Thai restaurant in Wicker Park, who had spent weeks learning to ask instead of command, who had reversed financial transactions at her word, and stood in a medical hallway, with shaking hands, was looking at her with an expression that was equal parts fear and apology, and something she could only describe as the particular anguish of watching your worst prediction come true. He had hidden her to protect her. He had stopped hiding her because she asked. And someone had noticed. 60 seconds later, a large Korean man appeared at the table with the silent efficiency of someone who had done exactly this before, in other restaurants, in other cities, under other circumstances. "Ms. Bell," he said, "I'm back, Jun-so. We need to go." Zuri looked at Mu-jin one more time. He looked back at her. Not commanding, not controlling, just looking at her with the full honest weight of what this moment cost them both. She picked up her coat. She stood up. "You have 30 minutes, she told Mu-jin. "And then you explain everything." A sound like green wood splitting. She walked out of the restaurant with a man she'd never met in her life, into a Chicago night that was no longer the same city she'd been walking through an hour before, and the door closed behind her, and she did not look back. The car didn't take her to the penthouse. She noticed that immediately the route was wrong, heading south and then west, instead of north toward the lakefront, and she said so flatly, to the back of Jun-seo's head. "We're not going to Mr. Kang's residence tonight," Jun-seo said. His English was precise and slightly formal, the same quality as Mu-jin's, but with a different accent underneath it. "There's a property outside the city, more secure. I didn't agree to leave Chicago. Miss Bell, I got in this car because Mu-jin asked me to trust him for 30 minutes. It has been 11 minutes. I am still within my window of reasonable cooperation." She watched the city sliding past the window. Who was in that restaurant? Jun-seo was quiet for a moment. "People connected to a problem we've been monitoring," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you right now." She looked at the back of his head. He was big not in a showy way, but the kind of big that came from a body that had been used seriously and consistently for a long time. His eyes in the rear-view mirror were calm, in a way that was not indifference. Professional steadiness. She recognized it, because she had spent years cultivating the same thing. "Are you a threat to me?" she asked. He met her eyes in the mirror. "No." "Are you a threat to my child?" "No." She held his gaze for a moment. Longer than was comfortable. He didn't look away. "Fine," she said. "But when we arrive, wherever we're arriving, I want Mu-jin on the phone within 5 minutes. He'll be there in person within the hour." She looked back out the window. Chicago fell away behind them. The estate was outside a town called Lake Forest, 40 minutes north of the city, on a private road that her phone's GPS stopped being able to map about half a mile before they reached the gate. The property itself was large and deliberately understated, no visible displays of wealth from the road, just a long driveway through heavy trees, and then a house that was designed to look like a house and not a fortress. Though Zuri's eyes, trained by a childhood spent watching her engineer father assess structures, noticed the reinforced window frames and the camera positions and the way the landscaping had been arranged to eliminate approach angles. Someone had thought very carefully about this building. She was shown to a room on the second floor, large, clean, impersonal in the way of spaces maintained for use rather than habitation. She sat on the edge of the bed and called Aliyah. It went to voicemail. She left a message that was factual and brief. She was safe. She was outside the city temporarily. She would explain when she could. She did not leave the address, because she did not know the address. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and breathed, deliberately. The way she breathed when a situation in the ward required her to function at full capacity, while her nervous system was firing emergency signals measured inhale, controlled exhale, the manual override of the body's panic reflex. She was 5 months pregnant and sitting in a house she didn't know in a town she barely recognized because someone, somewhere, had looked at her and seen her as leverage. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. The baby moved. Not dramatically, just the small internal flutter that had started 2 weeks ago and still stopped Zuri's breath every single time it happened. A flutter that said, "Still here, still here, still here." "I know," Zuri said quietly. "I've got you." Mu-jin's arrived in 53 minutes. She heard him before she saw him, the particular quality of a building rearranging itself around a person's arrival, the way Jun Seo's footsteps changed pace downstairs, the low exchange of voices. Then his footsteps on the stairs, he knocked. "Come in," she said. He opened the door and looked at her, and the assessment was immediate: her face, her posture, her hands, all of it catalogued in about 2 seconds, and then he exhaled. "You're all right," he said. "I'm all right." She stood up from the bed. "Now talk." He came into the room. He didn't sit. He stood near the window, his coat still on and his hands at his sides, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent the drive from the city, deciding how to say a thing that had no good version. "Someone has been monitoring your movements," he said, "for approximately 3 weeks. The restaurant tonight was not coincidental. They wanted me to know they could reach you there." "Who?" "People connected to a woman named Han Seo-rin." Zuri did not recognize the name. She said so. Mu-jin was quiet for a moment. "She and I have a history. 14 years ago, our families had a business arrangement that included an expectation of marriage. I ended that arrangement." Zuri looked at him. "You were supposed to marry her. It was never formalized. I rejected the arrangement before it reached that stage. But Seo-rin had built significant expectations around the alliance, professionally, financially, socially. My rejection cost her access to certain networks she had already begun leveraging." He paused. "She has never accepted it." 14 years, Zuri said. "She's been holding this for 14 years. She's been waiting for a vulnerability," Mu-jin said. "I have never given anyone one before." The sentence landed between them. Zuri sat back down on the edge of the bed, not from weakness, from the need to think, with her feet on the floor. "The press release," she said, "when you acknowledged the pregnancy publicly." "Yes, I asked you to do that." "Yes, and you did it," and it told her exactly what she needed to know. Mu-jin said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Zuri looked at the floor. Her mind was running through it, the timeline, the exposure, the chain of cause and effect that had moved from her request for visibility to a black car on a private road outside the city. All of it connected. "I'm not saying it was wrong to do," Mu-jin said carefully. "I know you're not." She looked up. "Don't manage this, Mu-jin. Don't frame it. Just tell me what we're dealing with." He pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from her, which she noted he was choosing to be at her level rather than standing over the conversation. "Seo-rin has people inside several networks I operate in," he said. "We didn't know the scope of it until tonight. Jun Seo has been running a parallel investigation for the past 10 days, and what came through tonight confirmed that the leak, the person who gave her your name, your hospital, your schedule, came from inside my organization." The room was quiet. "You have a mole," Zuri said. "Yes." "Do you know who?" "We have 2 suspects. Jinseo is working to confirm it." Zuri pressed her fingertips against her knees. Thought. The nurse in her was already organizing the information into categories: what was known, what was unknown, what were the action items. "What does she want?" Zuri asked. "Leverage. She wants me to know she can reach the people I care about. Whether that becomes a specific demand, money, business concessions, my withdrawal from certain markets, I don't know yet. So right now she's announcing capability. She hasn't made a move." "Correct. Then we have time." Mu-jin looked at her carefully. "Some. What does Junseo recommend?" "You stay here until we've confirmed the mole and contained the situation." Zuri nodded slowly. "And what do you recommend?" "The same." She looked at him directly. "And what I think doesn't factor into either of those recommendations." He held her gaze. "What you think is why I'm asking instead of deciding." She stood up again. walked to the window and looked out at the dark of the estate trees and the distant glint of what might have been a security light, and nothing else. Nothing that looked threatening. Nothing that looked like anything at all. She thought about her apartment, her hospital, the children who needed her to show up steady on Thursday mornings. "I'll stay tonight," she said. "I'll stay until Junso has a name. After that, we talk about a plan that doesn't involve me disappearing from my life. Zuri, that's my offer." She turned from the window. "I understand your world is dangerous. I understand what tonight was. But I am not going to become someone who lives in a house I didn't choose because your past followed you to a restaurant." She held his gaze. "You told me you were changing. Show me what that looks like when it's hard." The silence between them had weight. She could feel him working through it, not the impulse to control, which she was certain was there, but the effort to move past it to something else. "1 week," he said finally. "Give Junso 1 week to find the mole. After that, we build a plan together. You choose the terms." She looked at him for a long moment. "1 week," she said. "And I want full information. Whatever Junseo finds, I hear it directly. Not a version prepared for me. The actual information." "Agreed." She turned back to the window. "There's a guest room across the hall," she said. "You can stay or you can go back to the city. I don't care either way." He stayed. She didn't find out until morning, when she heard him in the hallway at 6A. Talking quietly on his phone. She lay still and listened to the cadence of it without understanding the words, and thought about the fact that she was 5 months pregnant in a house outside Chicago, while someone she'd never met made calculations about what she was worth as a threat. Then she got up, washed her face, and went downstairs to find coffee. The week inside the estate had a rhythm she hadn't expected. She had expected stagnation. Instead, she found herself in a strange suspension, removed from her normal life but not idle. Her mind running at the same operational pace it maintained on shift, processing the situation the way she processed medical crises, systematically, without the luxury of panic. Jun-si briefed her every evening. She had established this on day 2, after he brought information to Mu-jin directly, and she had walked into the room mid-briefing and said, with complete clarity, that she would not be receiving second-hand intelligence about threats to her own safety. Junso had looked at Mu-jin. Mu-jin had said, "Brief her directly from now on." And so every evening at 7, Junso brought what he had to the large kitchen table and laid it out in the same precise, methodical way. He presumably laid out everything, no editorializing, no softening of uncomfortable details. On day 3, Junso confirmed the identity of the mole. His name was Park Tae-yang. He had been with Kang Meridian for 9 years. He handled logistics coordinations for the Korean and Southeast Asian shipping routes, which gave him access to operational schedules, personnel rosters, and critically the communication channels through which Mu-jin's personal security details were coordinated. He had been passing information to a contact within Seo Rin's network for approximately 8 months. 8 months. The baby was 7 months along. Zuri sat across from Junsu at the kitchen table and did the math without being asked, and looked up at Mu-jin, who was standing near the kitchen door, and saw in his face that he had already done it. "He knew about the pregnancy before you did," she said. Mu-jin's jaw was rigid. "Before I believed it," he said. The distinction mattered. They both understood it. "He's been feeding her a timeline," Junso said. "The initial pregnancy, the paternity confirmation, the co-parenting agreement, the press release." He set down the paper. "She's been building a file." "For what?" Zuri said. Junso and Mu-jin exchanged a look that Zuri intercepted and dissected in approximately 1 second. "Tell me," she said. Junseo turned to her. "Seo Rin's contact reached out this morning. She's requesting a meeting with Mr. Kang. Her stated goal is a business negotiation. What she appears to actually want." He paused. "Junso," Mu-jin said. "She wants him to acknowledge her claims him to a seat at the table he rejected her from 14 years ago. She wants a formal business alliance on her terms. And she wants it structured in a way that gives her access to the Kang networks she lost when the marriage arrangement failed." He met Zuri's eyes. "She's indicated that her cooperation with keeping Miss Bell's situation private, meaning not she's built to certain interested parties in the criminal reps that are adjacent and on the Kang Meridian, is contingent on the negotiation. Silence. Zuri heard the refrigerator, the wind outside the kitchen window, her own breathing. She's threatening to expose me, Zuri said. Not a question. Not expose, Junso said carefully. Distribute. Information about your identity, your workplace, your home address, your medical appointments. To people whose interest in Mr. Kang is adversarial. Zuri looked at her hands on the table. So she's using me as leverage, she said. And her leverage works because Mu-jin will do something to prevent me from being targeted. Yes. And if he meets with her and gives her what she wants, she gets access to everything she's been building toward. For 14 years, Mu-jin said. And she'll use me as a channel, and everything I've been trying to move away from comes back. He crossed the room and sat down at the table. And it won't stop. Once she has that access, the leverage doesn't disappear. It compounds. Zuri looked at him. And if you don't meet with her, she distributes the file, and people come after me. Potentially. Potentially, she repeated. Yes. She was very quiet for a long moment. What were you planning to do, she said, before you agreed to brief me directly? Mu-jin held her gaze. Handle it the way I would have handled it 5 months ago. Which means, removing the problem, he said, not elaborating. He didn't need to. Zuri breathed. The baby moved. She pressed her hand to her side involuntarily and saw Mu-jin's eyes drop to the movement and then back to her face. That's not an option, she said. I know. Not because of legal risk. Not because it's strategically inadvisable, because it's wrong. Because I will not be the reason a situation ends that way, and our daughter will not be born into a world where her existence was the justification for. Zuri, his voice was quiet. I know. I already decided that before you said it. She looked at him for a long moment. Did you? She said. Yes. She studied his face. The thing about Mu-jin was that he was genuinely difficult to read, and she had spent enough time with him now to know the difference between the professional blankness and the real one. This was the real one, a man who had already come to the edge of something and stepped back from it, was telling her so without requiring credit for it. She believed him. She still didn't entirely like that, she believed him. Then we need a different approach, she said. And I want to be part of building it. Zuri, no. She sat forward. Listen to me carefully. This situation exists, partly because I asked you to make me visible. I made that choice without full information. That's not your fault. I was making an autonomous decision about my own life. But the consequences are mine too. And I am going to sit in a room while 2 men decide what to do about a threat to my safety and my child's safety without my voice in the room. She looked at Junseo. I have worked in emergency medicine for 4 years. I have managed pediatric crises at 2 in the morning with inadequate resources and no backup. I am not fragile, and I am not decorative, and I will not be managed. Jun-seo, to his credit, looked at her with what appeared to be genuine reassessment. What are you proposing, he said. I'm proposing. We expose the betrayal, she said. Not respond to it, not contain it quietly. Exposit. Park Tae-yang and his contact in the file, and what it contains and who built it and why. Publicly enough that Seo-rin loses the leverage because the information is no longer hers to distribute. Mu-jin was very still. That exposes you too, he said. I know. Your name. Your hospital. Your pregnancy. My name is already in a press release you issued, she said. My pregnancy is already public. The parts of my life she thinks are secret, my address, my medical appointments, those become threats only if she can use them to access people who want to hurt you without you knowing she's done it. She looked at him steadily. Remove the secrecy, remove the value of the file, and sever the access Tae-yang has given her to your internal channels so she can't build another one. The kitchen was quiet. Junseo looked at Mu-jin. Mu-jin looked at Zuri. That's not the method I would have chosen, Mu-jin said. I know, she said. It's mine. It has significant risks. Everything has significant risks. Your method had different ones. She held his gaze. You told me you were paying attention. You sat across from a woman in a coffee shop who told you she would not be managed, and you agreed to the terms. This is what those terms look like in practice. The silence went on long enough to be uncomfortable. Then Mu-jin turned to Junseo. What would we need, he said. Junso considered. Confirmation of the full scope of Taiyang's access. Documentation of the communications chain between him and Seo Rin's contact. And a way to deliver the exposure in a controlled enough manner that Ms. Bell is protected during the window between disclosure and the collapse of Seo Rin's leverage. How long? 72 hours to confirm and document. Another 24 to build the delivery. Mu-jin looked at Zuri. 4 days. 4 days, she said, and I stay informed of every development. Not briefed afterward, in the room. He looked at her for a long time. In the room, he said. She nodded once. The 4 days were some of the strangest of Zuri's life. Not because of fear. Exactly. Fear was something she had a working relationship with. She'd developed it the hard way. Standing in rooms where a child was losing a fight, and she was the only thing between the child and the worst possible outcome. Fear was information. She had learned to use it. What was strange was the closeness. 4 days in a house with Mu-jin and Jun-seo and 2 other security staff who she eventually learned were named Hyun-woo and Dae, both of whom communicated primarily in nods and were consistently impersonally professional. 4 days of evening briefings at the kitchen table and early mornings with coffee and the particular quiet of a house on alert. 4 days of watching Mu-jin operate in his actual element, not the version of him she'd seen in restaurants and medical waiting rooms, but the version that had built and maintained a powerful and dangerous organization for 2 decades. He was very good at it. She hadn't been naive enough to think he wasn't. But watching it up close was different. The phone calls that lasted 3 minutes and rearranged logistics she couldn't fully see. The way Jun-seo brought him information and Mu-jin processed it without visible reaction and then issued precise, measured responses. The quality of his attention never fragmented, never performative, just focused in a way that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. On day 2, she asked him about Park Tae-yang. They were in the kitchen, late after Jun-seo had gone to whatever room he slept in. Mu-jin was reviewing documents at the table, and Zuri was drinking decaf tea she'd found in a cabinet, and they had been sitting in companionable silence for 20 minutes, which had its own complicated quality. 9 years, she said. He looked up, knew immediately what she was asking. Yes. Did you trust him? Mu-jin considered the question. Not performing consideration, actually sitting with it. I trusted his work, he said. I trusted his competence and his consistency, and his discretion. Whether that's the same as trusting him as a person. He set down the document. In my world, those are different categories. That's a lonely way to live, she said. He looked at her directly. Yes, he said, it is. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Did you ever trust anyone as a person? She said. Before a pause. Jun-seo, he said, for 17 years. And no one else. She looked at him. He looked back. You trusted me, she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a manipulation. It was a fact she was naming. Yes, he said. And then you didn't. Yes. And now you're trying to figure out how to get back to it. He was quiet for a moment. I know where the door is. I'm not sure I've earned the right to use it yet. Zuri drank her tea, set the mug down. That, she said, is the most honest thing you've ever said to me. He almost smiled. The small, private one. The one she'd spent 4 months learning. She looked away. Looked at the window, at the dark outside. I'm going to need someone with me, she said, when this is over and I go back to my life. Not your people, not someone I didn't choose. What do you mean? A protection specialist. Someone I choose, someone whose loyalty is to me, not to Kang Meridian or to you or to any of the networks this situation lives inside. She turned back to him. A woman, someone who understands what it means to protect a pregnant person, and then a person with a newborn. Mu-jin thought about this. I can compile options. I'll compile my own options, she said. You can vet them for professional capability. But I choose. He nodded. She stood up, rinsed her mug. I'm going to sleep, she said. Wake me if Jun-seo has news. I will. She was at the kitchen door when she stopped. Mu-jin. Yes. When this is over, she said, I want you to understand something. I understand why you hid me. I understand the logic of it. Your world is dangerous, and I was unknown to your enemies, and that was its own protection. She looked at him steadily. But I need you to understand something in return. From From inside what I experienced, I was a woman you loved behind closed doors and refused to acknowledge in daylight. And that is a particular kind of invisibility that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with shame. She paused. I know that's not what you intended. I'm telling you what it felt like so that you understand what you're asking me to rebuild trust inside of. Mu-jin held her gaze. I understand, he said. It came out quiet. Careful, like someone handling something that could break. She nodded once and went upstairs. She lay awake for an hour, listening to the house. Then she slept. On day 3, Junso confirmed the full scope of Taeyong's access and laid the documentation on the kitchen table in a folder that was thicker than Zuri expected. She sat across from Junseo and went through it. Taeyong had been meticulous. 8 months of communications, forwarded internal schedules, personnel movements, financial routing information. His contact within Seo-rin's network was a man named Choi Byung-jun, who operated legitimate import businesses as cover and had been building a parallel intelligence file designed to be distributed across multiple adversarial networks simultaneously. The distribution list, when Junso produced it, made the room cold. 11 names, 11 separate criminal operations with existing grievances against Kang Meridian or against Mu-jin personally. 11 separate channels through which information about Zuri, her name, her hospital, her home address, her medical history, her pregnancy timeline, could flow to people with resources and motivation and no restraints. Zuri read the list. Then she set it face down on the table. The exposure plan, she said. Walk me through it. Junso began laying out the logistics. It was careful and thorough, a controlled disclosure to specific parties within the legitimate business networks that intersected with Kang Meridian, timed to occur simultaneously with the severing of Taeyong's access and the presentation of the documentation to people in positions to make Seo-rin's leverage legally dangerous for her to exercise. It neutralizes her, Junso said. It doesn't eliminate her. Good, Zuri said. Both men looked at her. I mean that. Elimination creates a vacuum, and something else fills it. Neutralization is permanent because the information is out, and the leverage is gone, and she has to calculate whether her next move costs more than she's willing to pay. Junso looked at her with the expression of someone revising an assessment they'd made too early. You've thought about this, he said. I've been sitting in this house for 3 days, she said. I've had time to think. Mu-jin was watching her from across the table. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Junso. There's one more piece, Junso said. Something in his voice changed. Zuri looked at him. He set a photograph on the table. This is who approached Taeyang, he said. The person who recruited him 8 months ago. Not Choi Byung-jun. He was the handler. The person who made initial contact, who knew enough about Kang Meridian's internal structure to identify Taeyang as a viable asset. Mu-jin leaned forward and looked at the photograph. His face went still in a way Zuri had never seen before. Not the controlled stillness. Something underneath it, like the ground shifting. Juns, he said. His voice had changed register entirely. I'm sorry, Junso said. I confirmed it this morning. Zuri looked at the photograph. It was a man in his late 50s. Distinguished looking. Silver hair. A face that had a certain practiced warmth in it, the kind that came from decades of professional performance. She didn't recognize him. She looked at Mu-jin. His hands were flat on the table. Not trembling the way they'd trembled in the ultrasound room. Completely, absolutely still in the way of something that has been turned to stone. Who is that? She said. Mu-jin didn't answer. Mu-jin, she kept her voice level. Who is that? His name is Kong Sung-ho, Junso said quietly. Zuri looked between them. That's your name, she said to Mu-jin. Yes, Junso said. A beat. He's Mu-jin's father. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Zuri sat very still. Mu-jin's hands on the table were the flattest, most motionless things in the room, and he was looking at the photograph the way someone looks at a thing they have always known was possible and spent decades refusing to believe. And now the belief was no longer optional because the evidence was right there in front of him under fluorescent kitchen, light, irrefutable and total. His father had recruited the mole. His father had built the path that led Seo-rin directly to Zuri. His father had handed the only person who had ever made Kang Mu-jin genuinely vulnerable to the one enemy who had been waiting longest to use that vulnerability. Zuri watched his face. She watched him absorb it. She watched the moment it moved from information to reality, the specific crossing of that threshold that she had witnessed in families and colleagues and knew was one of the most private things a human being could experience. She did not reach for him. She did not say anything comforting. She sat there and let it be what it was. Then she said quietly and without any softening at all, "Then, that's where we start." Mu-jin didn't move from the kitchen table for a long time. Jun-seo had stepped out, not asked to leave. Just read the room with the precision of a man who had spent 17 years knowing when to disappear, and Zuri sat across from Mu-jin with the photograph still face down between them and watched him process something that had no clean shape to it. She had seen this before. Not in this context, not with this specific texture of damage, but the phenomenon itself, a person absorbing information that restructured the architecture of their entire history. Families in the pediatric ward received it sometimes. A diagnosis that reframed every previous symptom. A genetic result that explained years of questions and simultaneously created new ones. The moment when the story a person had been telling themselves about their life cracked along a seam they hadn't known existed. She didn't try to accelerate it. She poured herself water from the pitcher on the table. She drank it. She set the glass down. Mu-jin finally turned the photograph face up. He looked at his father's face. "When I was 23, he said, my father told me that the shipping business would destroy me if I let it. That the only way to survive it was to keep everything compartmentalized. Family in one room, business in another, anything you loved in a room with no windows." His voice was completely flat. Not performing composure, actually flat. The way things go flat when the emotional circuitry has briefly overloaded. "I thought he was protecting me." "Maybe he was," Zuri said. "At the beginning, maybe." He set the photograph down. "He contacted Seo Rin 6 months before I rejected the marriage arrangement. He had already begun building the alliance with her family. When I pulled out, I didn't just cost Seo Rin her expectations. I cost him a deal he'd been constructing for 2 years." Zuri absorbed this. "He never told you. He told me I was making a mistake. That Seo Rin was a strategic asset and my personal feelings about the arrangement were irrelevant to the business reality." Mu-jin's jaw tightened. "I told him the business was mine to run. He's accepted it." "I thought he accepted it." "He didn't accept it. Apparently for 14 years he did not." Zuri looked at the photograph. At the distinguished silver-haired man who had, from a distance and over years, built a careful trap around his own son's first genuine vulnerability. "He knew about me before the press release," she said. "Yes. Jun-seo's documentation shows contact with Tai Yang beginning 4 months ago before the public announcement, before the co-parenting agreement. Before the prenatal appointment." He paused. "Shortly after I first told him I had taken a paternity test." The kitchen was cold. "You told him," Zuri said. "He's my father." The words came out with a specific gravity. Not an excuse. A fact that explained something without justifying it. "And he gave that information to Seo Rin." "To Choi Byung-jun, who gave it to Seo Rin, yes." Zuri thought about the restaurant. The black sedan. The 53-minute drive to a house outside the city. All of it set in motion by a man who had decided his son's child was a resource to be leveraged before she was even born. She felt something cold and very clear settle into her chest. "What are you going to do?" she said. Mu-jin looked at the photograph. "I don't know yet," he said, "and I need to know before I do anything." She understood that. She stood, took her glass to the sink, rinsed it, set it in the drying rack. "Then figure it out tonight," she said, "because tomorrow we finish the plan." She went upstairs. She didn't sleep for a long time. By morning, Mu-jin had made 2 phone calls. The first was to Kang Sung-ho. Zuri knew about it because she was in the hallway when he made it, and she didn't move away, and he didn't ask her to. She stood at the top of the stairs and listened to the call. She could only hear one side of Mu-jin's voice, very quiet in Korean, and then a pause, and then something that was not loud, but carried the specific quality of a sentence that ends a certain kind of relationship permanently. She did not understand the words. She understood the silence after. He stood in the hallway below for a while before he moved. The second call was to a lawyer, not his corporate attorney, but someone else, someone Junso provided a number for, whose specialty Zuri did not ask about and did not need to. Over breakfast, which was coffee and whatever Hyunwoo had sourced from somewhere that turned out to be decent eggs and bread, Mu-jin told Zuri what he had decided. He was not going to remove his father from the situation the way he would have removed any other threat. His father would face the exposure plan the same way Seo-rin would the documentation, the disclosure, the removal of leverage through visibility. The legal consequences would be whatever they were. He had pulled his father out of the operational structure of Kang Meridian this morning. Permanently. He'll fight it, Junso said. Yes, Mu-jin said. He ate his eggs. Let him. Zuri looked at him across the table. At the specific quality of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is now simply living on the other side of it. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, he said. He made his decision. That doesn't mean it doesn't cost you. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It doesn't mean that. She reached across the table and put her hand over his for approximately 4 seconds. Then she took it back and picked up her coffee. Junso looked at his eggs with great professional concentration. They executed the exposure plan on day 4, beginning at 8 in the morning. Jun Seo ran it from the estate with 2 laptops and a phone that did not stop for 6 hours. Zuri sat at the table and was told everything in real time, as agreed, and tracked it the way she tracked a complex patient situation, multiple variables, multiple timelines, the knowledge that some outcomes were outside her control, and the task was to manage what wasn't. The documentation went to 3 parties simultaneously, a federal investigator Junso had worked with before on a separate matter and whose interest in Choi Byung-jun's import businesses was, apparently, already established, a journalist at a business publication who had been investigating Seo-rin's financial network for 18 months and had the professional infrastructure to handle the information responsibly, and the board of directors of Kang Meridian Shipping, who had the organizational standing to act on the personnel and security implications immediately. Park Taeyang access to internal systems was severed at 9:47 in the morning. He called Junso's direct line 6 minutes later. Junso put the call on speaker, looked at Mu-jin, and Mu-jin nodded. The voice on the line was controlled at first. Professional, even. Taeyang asked what had happened to his system access. Junso told him it had been revoked pending investigation. The control cracked at the edges almost immediately, not dramatically, not into shouting, just into the specific frequency of a man who has been very good at a deception for a long time and has just heard the sound of it ending. Mr. Kang Taeyang said. He had understood correctly that the speaker function meant he was not talking to more than Jun Seo. I can explain to the investigators, Mu-jin said. I have nothing to say to you. He nodded at Junso. Junso ended the call. The table was very quiet. How long until Seo-rin's contact receives the documentation? Zuri asked. The journalist runs on a 2-hour cycle for verification, Junso said. We should see a response from her network by noon. The response came at 11:43, not from Seo-rin directly. From Choi Byung-jun, through a number that Jun Seo had flagged as a contact channel. The message was 8 words in Korean, which Jun Seo translated for Zuri without being asked. Tell him we should discuss terms before this continues. She's scared, Zuri said. She's calculating, Junso said. Same thing in her position. Zuri looked at Mu-jin. Don't negotiate. The documentation is already moving. Negotiation now just slows the exposure without changing the outcome. Mu-jin was watching her. She'll distribute what she has, he said. Not an argument, a variable being named. Then she distributes it to people who are now aware that a federal investigator is looking at Choi Byung-jun's networks, Zuri said. She distributes to people who are being watched, using information her own network has already been compromised for supplying. She held his gaze. Her leverage works only if she can use it without cost to herself. We've changed the cost. Junso nodded. Mu-jin picked up his phone, dictated a response to Junso in Korean. Junso relayed it. The response was, Zuri understood from context and from Junseo's brief translation. There is nothing to discuss. At 12:30, everything accelerated. Jun Seo's contact at the federal level called to confirm that the investigation into Choi Byung-jun's businesses, which had been moving at the pace of a cautious bureaucratic process, had just received enough material to significantly expedite. An asset of theirs within Seo Rin's financial network had, upon learning that the documentation was moving, provided additional corroboration. The investigator used the word cooperative with a specific satisfaction. At 1:15, the journalist called Junseo's secure line to confirm the piece was moving to editorial. At 1:49, Mu-jin received a call from a number he stared at for a long moment before answering. He walked out of the kitchen. Zuri looked at Junseo. Seorin, Junseo said. Directly, yes. She pushed back from the table and stood up. Her back had been protesting the kitchen chairs for 2 days, the particular low-grade rebellion of a pregnant body subjected to sustained sitting, and she moved to the window and stood there and listened to the sounds from the other room without being able to make out words. The call lasted 4 minutes. Mu-jin came back into the kitchen. He sat down. She wanted to tell me herself, he said. Tell you what, Zuri said, that she's willing to stand down. That she considers the situation concluded. His voice was measured. She also wanted me to know that she did not authorize physical harm to you or the child at any point. That her intent was leverage, not violence. Do you believe her? Zuri said. Mu-jin thought about this. On the violence question. Yes, he said. Seo Rin is strategic. Physical harm would have been escalation she couldn't control. She wouldn't have risked it. He paused. On the rest of it on her, considering it concluded, I believe she has correctly assessed that the leverage is gone and that continuing to press would cost her more than she stands to gain. That's not the same as it being over, Zuri said. No, he agreed, it's not. She turned from the window. I want to go home, she said. Mu-jin looked at her. Today, he said, this afternoon. I've been out of my apartment for 5 days. I have a shift at Mercy Children's on Thursday. I have a life that needs to resume. She held his gaze. The leverage is gone. The exposure is moving. The federal investigation is accelerating. I am not going to stay in this house for another week, waiting for a threat that has already structurally collapsed. Junseo looked at Mu-jin. Mu-jin looked at Zuri. I want Nadine with you, he said. Nadine, the protection specialist you asked for. I had Junseo put together a file. He reached across the table and slid a folder toward her. Nadine Mercer, former Army, 12 years. She has independent contracts. She works for clients, not for me. She has a daughter. Junseo vetted her professional record. Zuri opened the folder. Nadine Mercer looked back at her from the top sheet. 42. A face that was direct and somewhat weathered, and had the particular expression of someone who assessed situations before she assessed people. Zuri read through the file. She looked up. I contact her myself, she said. Yes, I conduct my own interview. Yes, and if I decide she's not the right fit, we find someone else. On my terms. On your terms, he said. She closed the folder. Open the gate, she said. I'm going home. The drive back to the city was the first time Zuri had been alone, genuinely alone, without Junseo or Hyunwoo or Dae, within a room's distance in 5 days. She drove herself. She had required this. Mu-jin had walked her to her car with an expression that suggested he found this deeply inadvisable and had the restraint not to say so. She rolled the windows down on the highway and let the cold November air come through and just drove. She called Aliyah from the hands-free. Are you alive? Aliyah said by way of greeting. I'm alive. You sound like you've been in a bunker. Close, I'll explain in person. She merged into traffic heading south toward Chicago. Are you free tonight for you? Yes. Obviously, yes. I'll text you when I'm back. Bring food. Something real. I will bring enough food for a crisis debrief, which is apparently what this is. That's exactly what it is. She hung up and drove. The city appeared on the horizon the way it always did, sudden and enormous and completely indifferent to what anyone was going through, and something in Zuri's chest released when she saw it. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. She was a Chicago woman. She needed Chicago around her the way she needed the cold and the noise and the lake. She rolled back into her neighborhood at 4 in the afternoon. parked in her spot, walked up the stairs to her apartment with her bag over her shoulder, and stood inside her own front door for a moment. Same plant, slightly thirsty. Same stack of books on the end table. Same view from the window of the apartment building across the street, where the woman on the third floor always had her lights on too early in winter. Hers, she watered the plant. She called Nadine Mercer. The call lasted 40 minutes. Nadine Mercer did not perform reassurance. She asked questions precise, practical, not gentle about the nature of the threat, the timeline of the exposure plan, the specific vulnerabilities in Zuri's current routines. She asked about the pregnancy, not with solicitude but with operational specificity. How far along? What was the medical schedule? What were the physical limitations on mobility at this stage? Zuri answered everything directly. At the 30-minute mark, Nadine said, "I need to be clear about something. My contract is with you, not with Kang Mu-jin, not with his organization, not with anyone in his orbit. If there's ever a conflict between what you need and what he wants, I act on what you need." "That's exactly what I require," Zuri said. "Then we should meet in person before I confirm. Tomorrow morning, my choice of location." "Fine. Send me the address." Zuri liked her. She didn't say so. It was too early and she was too careful, but the way she registered it. Things that had solid professional weight to them. After the call, she sat on her couch and ate crackers because it was the most immediately available food in her apartment, and she hadn't eaten since the morning's eggs, and she pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the small, persistent flutter. "We're doing okay," she said. The flutter continued. "Yeah," she said, "me too." She called Mu-jin at 7. "I'm home," she said. "I spoke with Nadine Mercer. We're meeting tomorrow." "Good." A pause. "How are you?" Not "how are you" as a social formula, with the specific gravity of someone asking an actual question about an actual person. She thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said. "Angry still, at the size of the situation I got pulled into. Clear, which is better than I expected to feel. Clear about what? About what matters. About what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not." She paused. "About you." Silence on the line. "What about me?" he said. "I haven't decided everything," she said. "I want that stated plainly. 5 days in a house doesn't change what you did to me in October, and it doesn't erase the 4 months before that, when I was your secret. It doesn't resolve every question I have about whether your world is something I can build a life adjacent to." "I understand," but she paused. "You did what I asked. Every time I asked something of you that cost you something real, the transactions, the press release, the briefings, the gate you did it, without negotiating me down to something more comfortable for you." He said nothing. "I'm paying attention too," she said. That's all. She heard him exhale. "Get some rest," he said. Quietly. "You too." She hung up and went to bed and slept for 9 hours straight, which was the best sleep she'd had in a week. And when she woke up, Chicago was gray and cold outside her window, and she felt provisionally and carefully something that she would eventually categorize as the beginning of solid ground. 3 weeks passed. The journalist's piece ran. It was thorough, sourced, and professional, and it named Seo Rin's network in the context of the federal investigation into Choi Byung-jun's businesses without speculating beyond what the documentation supported. It named Park Tae-yang as a cooperating subject in the investigation. It did not name Zuri. It named Mu-jin only in the context of his company being the target of the intelligence operation, which was accurate and which positioned him as the subject of a criminal scheme rather than a participant in one. Nadine Mercer began her contract on a Tuesday. She was exactly what her file suggested: efficient, dry-humored, and categorically unintimidated by any of the circumstances. She had a daughter named Rosa, who was 6, and who Nadine mentioned exactly twice in Zuri's presence, both times in the context of scheduling, and not once in the context of sentiment, which Zuri found deeply relatable. Mu-jin and Zuri fell into a rhythm. It was not romantic exactly, or it was not only that, and the qualification mattered. A sound like green wood splitting. It was the particular rhythm of two people who had significant and unresolved history, and a child coming in approximately 12 weeks, and the shared, careful project of figuring out whether the history was survivable. He came to the 32-week appointment. He came to the 34-week appointment. He did not attempt to come early, or to bring an entourage, or to make any of it into a display. He showed up when he said he would show up, and he asked the doctor the kind of questions that indicated he had been reading, which Zuri noticed, and he sat in the chairs in the waiting rooms with the patience of someone learning a new discipline. On a Thursday evening in late January, he showed up at her apartment with takeout she hadn't ordered. She opened the door and looked at him. "Jun-seo told me you skipped lunch," he said. Jun-seo needs to focus on his own lunch. Jun-seo is also eating. "He asked me to bring you food." She stepped back from the door. He came in, set the food on her kitchen counter, looked at her apartment the way he'd never looked at it before, with attention rather than evaluation. The books stacked by the couch. The baby clothes folded on the chair she'd designated for nursery preparation overflow. The family photograph on the wall above the television. "Sit," she said, "if you're staying." He sat. They ate at her small kitchen table, and it was nothing like the late-night penthouse dinners of before, smaller and more ordinary, and somehow, for that reason, more real. "The anatomy scan photo," he said at some point, "the one I taped together." He reached into her coat and set it on the table between them. She looked at it. The tape lines were visible. It would never look new. But all the pieces were there, assembled with care, and the image was intact, the blurry, gray, unmistakable image of a 10-week life. "I've been carrying it," he said, "since October. I didn't know what to do with it, but I needed to keep it." Zuri looked at the photograph for a long time. She picked it up. "I'm going to put it in her baby book," she said, "when she has one." Mu-jin was very still. "If that's all right," Zuri said. "Yes," he said. His voice was slightly different. "That's yes." She set it carefully to the side. "The 36-week appointment is on the 14th, she said. "Anatomy confirmation and birth plan discussion. I'll be there." "I know." She looked at him across her small kitchen table with the takeout containers between them and the evidence of her life surrounding them, her books and her plant and her family photo and the baby clothes on the chair. "She's going to know you, whatever happens between us. Whatever we figure out, or don't figure out, she's going to grow up, knowing her father was present." "I'm committing to that." Mu-jin held her gaze. "I'm committing to being worth knowing," he said. She considered that. Then she got up and cleared the containers, and he helped, and they moved around her small kitchen. They moved around particular negotiated choreography of two people who had not yet decided exactly what they were, but had decided they were something. And outside, the January wind came off the lake and shook the windows. When he left, she locked the door and stood in the middle of her living room for a moment. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby moved, not a flutter now, 34 weeks in, but a full deliberate push, the movement of someone who had grown into her space and was not apologetic about it. "Almost," Zuri told her. "We're almost there." The 36-week appointment was on a Tuesday. Mu-jin was in the waiting room when Zuri arrived. He was again. Already there, she had stopped being irritated by this and had started understanding it as a characteristic, the way she understood other things about him that were not convenient but were genuine. He stood when she came in. His eyes went to her stomach the way they always did, and then to her face as in the small private expression appeared briefly, and she looked away. They sat next to each other. "I had a meeting this morning," he said, "with Jun-seo and the legal team about the restructuring. The timelines," he paused. "I'm withdrawing from 4 major contractual relationships by the end of Q2. The ones that were adjacent to the parts of the business that needed to end. Jun-seo is overseeing the transition to legitimate freight contracts in those lanes." Zuri looked at her hands. "You're actually doing it," she said. "Yes. I didn't know if you would. I told you I would." "People say things," she said. "You know that as well as I do." "Yes." "A beat, I know." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Not as an accusation. I want to actually understand it. Your business has operated that way for 20 years. It's profitable. It's functional by its own logic. You're not being legally compelled to change it." She kept her eyes on his face. "So why are you?" Mu-jin was quiet for a moment. "Because I held my daughter's heartbeat in a room at Northwestern Medicine, and I understood for the first time in my life that I had built something that would eventually require her to pay for it." He said it evenly, not dramatically. Like a man stating a calculation he had worked through very carefully and arrived at with complete certainty. I have spent my entire adult life making my father's world more efficient. I have not once questioned whether it was a world worth making efficient. He paused. She made me question it. Zuri was quiet. She's not even born yet, she said. No, he said. She's changing things anyway. The nurse called her name. They walked in together. The room was the same examination room as before, same lighting, same equipment, same particular smell of medical spaces that Zuri navigated on instinct. She settled into position, and the cold gel went on, and the transducer moved. And the monitor showed a face, not the abstract shapes of earlier scans, a face. Recognizable as a face. Eyes closed. A nose that was Mu-jin's nose, or that might be, or that was at least a nose, belonging to a person who would eventually have opinions about noses and everything else. Fingers, toes, the doctor noted, perfectly developing. A heartbeat so steady, it sounded like something that had always existed and always would. Then the doctor said, "And I can confirm you're having a daughter." Mu-jin made a sound. Not words, just a sound, low and completely unguarded, like something that had been compressed for a long time and had found a fracture. Zuri turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at the monitor. His face was open in a way she had never seen it. Not the controlled stillness, not the boardroom blankness, not even the private expression she'd cataloged over months. Something entirely unguarded. The expression of a man who had believed for 14 years that this moment was impossible, who had tried once to destroy the evidence of it, who had been handed the evidence back and had spent months trying to deserve it. He was crying, not quietly, not with the composed restraint of a man managing his emotions in public. Actually crying, one hand pressed against his mouth, the other gripping the edge of his chair. Zuri looked at the monitor, at the small face, the fingers. The steady heartbeat. She felt the last wall she had been maintaining, not the legitimate careful boundary, but the tentative one. The one she had built specifically to survive the winter, develop a crack she couldn't repair. She had loved him before. She had spent months deciding what that meant. She was still deciding. But the man in the chair beside her, who had spent 40 years building walls around everything that mattered and was now completely demolished by the sight of his unborn daughter on a medical monitor. She loved that man in a way that was different from the way she'd loved the king. Late-night dinner version, the midnight phone call version. She loved him accurately, with full information. With the torn ultrasound, and the accusations, and the 5 days in a house outside Chicago, and the exposure plan, and the father who had betrayed him, and the criminal organization he was methodically dismantling because his daughter deserved better. She loved him with all of that included. She didn't say it yet. She wasn't done deciding what came with it. But she looked at the monitor, at her daughter's face, and she felt it with the specific weight of something real. When the appointment was over, they stood in the hallway, and Mu-jin had composed himself mostly, and Zuri was putting her coat on, and she stopped with one arm in and looked at him. "I still love you," she said. "I want to say that. Not as a resolution to anything, not as permission for anything." She held his gaze. "But you should know it." He looked at her. "Zuri, and it comes with conditions," she said. "Real ones. Not negotiating points. The conditions I've already stated, and more that we'll figure out as we go, and the fundamental one that I will never become your possession regardless of how this liminess." "I know," he said. "It came out rough. I know all of it." "Then say it back to me," she said. "Not that you love me." "I know that. Say the other part." He held her gaze. "You are not mine," he said. "You are yours. Our daughter is yours. I am asking to be chosen, not taken, not managed, not kept." "Chosen." She studied him. "Okay," she said. She put her other arm in her coat. "I have a shift tomorrow morning," she said, "and we need to talk about the birth plan." "I know. And the nursery. The one you had your people design is too much," he said. "I know, we start over, simple. Her books and her animals and warm walls." "Yes," she turned toward the elevator. "Mu-jin." "Yes. Don't make me regret saying it." "I won't." She pressed the button. The elevator came. She stepped in and turned, and he was still standing in the hallway, and the doors began to close. And in the last second before they shut, she saw his expression, not the private small expression she'd learned, Not the controlled, professional stillness, but something that had no name except the face a person makes when they understand, with complete clarity, how close they came to destroying everything that mattered, and are now, improbably, standing on the other side of it. The doors closed. The elevator dropped. She put her hand on her stomach. Her daughter pushed back, firm and certain, and already her own person. Zuri thought 12 weeks. 12 weeks until everything that had been broken and rebuilt and broken again and rebuilt differently would have to be strong enough to hold the weight of an entirely new person who deserved to arrive into something solid. She thought, we are not there yet. She thought, but we are closer than I thought we could be. The elevator opened onto the lobby. She walked out into the Chicago January, cold enough to make her eyes water immediately, whined straight off the lake with nothing polite about it, and she thought about the face on the monitor, the fingers, the heartbeat, the name she had been turning over for weeks like a stone. She wasn't ready to set down. She thought Senna. She thought Senna Amani Kang, and something in that name, in the specific sound of it, in the way it contained two worlds, and belonged completely to a third one that was just beginning. Something in that name, it felt like the beginning of the thing she had not been ready to call solid until just now, in a Chicago January. Walking toward her car with her daughter, pushing steadily against her palm. Not the end of anything. The beginning of the part that would require everything they had. She walked. The city was cold and enormous and indifferent. She walked through it anyway, because she always had, and because her daughter was watching from the inside, a sound like green wood splitting, and because 12 weeks from now the only thing that would matter was whether the ground they'd been building was real enough to stand on. She believed it was. She was not entirely certain. But she was close enough to certain that she walked toward her car without looking back, which was for Zuri Bell the truest measure of faith she knew how to give. The 12 weeks did not pass gently. Zuri had known they wouldn't. She was a nurse who had spent 4 years watching the gap between what people expected and what actually happened. And she had long ago stopped believing that time moved at the pace of the story you needed it to tell. Time moved at its own pace, indifferent and grinding, and what you did inside it was your own business. What she did inside those 12 weeks was work. She worked her shifts at Mercy Children's with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the hospital was not just her career, it was the structure that had held her together through everything. The place where the requirements were clear and the purpose was unambiguous, and the feedback was immediate. A child needed her. She was there. That equation had never failed her. She worked with Nadine Mercer on the security protocols that would govern her life after Senna arrived, not because the threat from Seo Rin's network remained active, but because Zuri was a practical woman who had learned in 5 days at a lake estate that the world her daughter was being born into had edges she needed to understand. Nadine was direct and organized and had no patience for anxiety that didn't produce useful action, which Zuri found clarifying rather than harsh. She worked on the nursery. This was, unexpectedly, the thing she found most difficult. Not logistically. Logistically, it was straightforward: clear out the second bedroom, paint the walls the warm terracotta she'd chosen from a sample strip held against the light for 20 minutes, assemble the simple white crib that had taken her and Aaliyah 3 hours and one genuinely tense argument about instructions, order the books, wash the small clothes, put the stuffed elephant on the shelf. What was difficult was the feeling the room produced when she stood in it. She would stand in the doorway of the nursery in the evenings after her shift, still in her scrubs, and look at the small space that had been transformed into something waiting, and she would feel the specific weight of what she had built alone. Not with bitterness, she was past that, or past the version of it that had a bitter taste. Just with the plain recognition of what the past several months had cost her, in ways that had no dollar amount and no clean resolution. She had built this alone because she had needed to. She was still alone in this apartment, and she was going to remain so, because whatever came with Mu-jin was still in the process of becoming something she could fully trust. She pressed her hand against the doorframe. She thought about Senna. She thought, when you get here, you will see what your mother built. She thought, it will be enough. Mu-jin came to the apartment twice more before the birth. The first time was to see the nursery. He had asked plainly without framing it as anything other than what it was. He wanted to see where his daughter would sleep. Zuri had said yes. He stood in the doorway of the nursery the same way she stood in it, with both hands at his sides, and the particular stillness of someone absorbing something that mattered. He looked at the books on the shelf, at the stuffed elephant, at the simple white crib with the small blanket folded at the foot of it, at the framed photograph on the wall above the dresser, the taped-together ultrasound, from 10 weeks, the one he had torn apart and reassembled and carried for months, before setting it on her kitchen table. She had framed it, tape lines and all. He looked at it for a long time. "You framed it as it is," he said. "Yes, not reprinted. Not replaced. No." She leaned against the doorframe. "That's what it looks like. That's what it actually is. I'm not going to put a different version on her wall." He turned to look at her. "She should know," Zuri said. "Not as a story designed to make you the villain. As the true version, which is that her father was afraid, and he made a terrible choice, and then he spent a long time trying to be someone who deserved to be in this room." She held his gaze. "That's not a punishment. That's just what happened." He held her gaze. "She'll know everything," he said. "Yes," Zuri said, "she will." He looked back at the photograph on the wall. "Thank you," he said, very quietly. "Don't thank me. Just be worth the story." She pushed off from the doorframe and went to start dinner, and he stood in the nursery doorway for another minute before he followed her. They ate at her small table again. He was 38 weeks by then, and sitting comfortably had become a negotiation, and she ate with the focused efficiency of someone fueling a construction project. He had learned not to comment on how much she ate, which she had told him once, plainly, and he had absorbed without drama. He told her about the restructuring. 2 of the 4 contractual withdrawals were complete. A third was in final negotiation. The other party was not pleased, and Mu-jin described the conversation with the dry, factual precision of a man reporting weather. The 4th would be done by April. "Jun Seo thinks I'm insane," he said. "Jun Seo has been running this organization, as it was for 17 years, Zuri said. "Of course he thinks that. He supports it." A pause. "He just also thinks I'm insane. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Mu-jin looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "No," he said, "they're not." She looked at him across the table. 38 weeks and exhausted down to the cellular level and still managing her shifts and her life, and the logistics of a birth plan, and the slow, careful work of deciding what she was building with the man across from her. "Your father," she said. He went still. She hadn't brought it up since the estate. Slits. She had been waiting, not avoiding it, just waiting for the moment when it was the right thing to address us, rather than something she was inserting into a space that wasn't ready for it. "What about him?" Mu-jin said. His voice was even. "Where is it now?" "The legal situation, moving." He set down his fork. "His attorney is negotiating. The federal investigators are more interested in Choi Byung-jun and Selvrin's network than they are in my father specifically, so his exposure is contained." For now, yes." Zuri considered this, and "between you," she said. Mu-jin was quiet for a moment. "There is no between us," he said. "I have not spoken to him since the morning at the estate. I don't intend to. He's going to want to see Sina." The silence that followed had a specific texture, not the silence of someone who hadn't thought about this, but of someone who had thought about it and had not yet arrived at a position. "I know," he said. "I'm not telling you what to decide," Zuri said. "She's your father. That's your damage to navigate. I'm telling you that whatever you decide, it happens on terms that protect her. Not terms that protect a family image or a business relationship or any other thing." Her yes. He picked up his fork, put it back down. "I know. Good." She went back to her food. He sat across from her in the small apartment with Chicago January pressing against the windows, and whatever he was working through, he worked through it quietly, which she had come to understand was how he did most of his real processing, internally and without announcement. She could live with that. She couldn't live with someone who made their internal weather everyone else's emergency. He had learned not to do that. She noted it. The second visit, 6 days before Sina arrived, was not planned. Zuri was coming off a night shift at 2 in the morning. which she had been clear-eyed about telling her charge nurse she could still handle, which was technically true, and also the kind of judgment call that her baba was increasingly litigating. She was 39 weeks and 3 days, and she moved through the hospital with the dignified deliberateness of a cargo ship, and she had made peace with this. She came out of the elevator in her building lobby, and Mu-jin was sitting in one of the chairs near the door. She stopped. He stood up. I didn't come to do anything," he said immediately, reading her expression. I couldn't sleep, and I drove, and I ended up here." She looked at him. He looked like a man who had been sitting in a lobby chair for possibly a long time, coat still on, phone in his hand with the screen dark. She seen. He looked, in the specific fluorescent light of a residential building lobby at 2 in the morning, like someone who was finding the approach of something immense more difficult than he had prepared for. She had felt that. She knew what that looked like from the inside. "Come upstairs," she said. "You should sleep. I'm going to sleep. Come upstairs." She made him tea, the same tea she drank, because it was 2 in the morning, and she sat on one end of the couch, and he sat on the other, and outside the city did its quiet version of itself, which was still not quiet by any reasonable standard, but was relative. "Tell me what's actually happening," she said. He held his mug. Looked at it. "I have spent my entire life operating under the assumption that I would not have this," he said. "A child, a family, the specific weight of being responsible for something that cannot protect itself." He looked up. "I know how to manage threats. I know how to structure organizations and navigate adversarial relationships and absorb damage without showing the cost of it." He paused. "I do not know how to be a father." Zuri looked at him. "Nobody does," she said. "Before it happens, I seem prepared because I am a nurse who processes anxiety into logistics," she said. "I have a go-bag by the door and a birth plan in 3 copies, and I've read 4 books about the 4th trimester. None of that means I know what I'm doing." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I'm terrified, Mu-jin. I have been terrified since October, and I did not have the luxury of showing it, because I was too busy being abandoned, and then suspicious and then the terms of a situation I never asked to be in." He looked at her. "Now I'm 39 weeks and I'm going to give birth to a person who is going to need things from me that I've never been asked for before," she said. "And I'm doing it without a partner in the traditional sense, and with a co-parent whose capacity I have been assessing in real time for 5 months. And I'm afraid." The apartment was very quiet. "But here's the thing," she said. "The fear is just information. It's telling me this is enormous. It is enormous. And I'm going to do it anyway because she's coming regardless of whether I'm ready, and readiness is a thing we build in the doing, and not a thing we arrive at, fully formed." Mu-jin was watching her. "You are the most," he started. "Don't," she said. "I'm not being impressive. I'm being honest." "There's a difference." He was quiet. "I don't want to fail her," he said. Plainly, no performance around it. "I know," she looked at him. "You won't fail her by being imperfect. You'll fail her if you stop trying. That's the only version of failure that actually sticks." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. She finished her tea. "The pull-out couch is functional," she said. "Sleep here if you want. I'm going to bed." She did not wait for an answer. She heard, just before she closed her bedroom door, the small sounds of him setting down the mug and removing his coat, and then the quiet of someone settling. She lay down. Her daughter shifted inside her, a long, slow roll, the movement of someone who had run out of room and was beginning to make her impatience known. "I know," Zuri said quietly. "Me too," she slept. Senna Imani Kang arrived on a Thursday morning in June. Not quietly, not easily, not in the soft cinematic version where the difficulty is implied and result is immediate and clean. She arrived after 14 hours that began on a Wednesday evening when Zuri's water broke while she was eating dinner at Alia's apartment, and which proceeded with the grinding, relentless, corporeal reality of a human body doing the most demanding thing it is capable of. Mu-jin drove her to the hospital. She had called him because he was the birth plan. Not because he had campaigned for it, he had offered, plainly, and she had thought about it for a week and decided that whatever else was unresolved, having him, there was the right choice for Sina, who would be born into a world where both her parents were present. He drove with complete focus and no conversation, which was correct. He carried her bag. He spoke to the intake nurse with the focused, clear information delivery of someone who had been briefed and had paid attention, which was also correct. Nadine was there. She had been Zuri's call. Zuri had reached out at the first contraction, and Nadine had arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later and positioned herself in the room with the particular unobtrusive efficiency of someone who was present without being in the way. Alia was there. Zuri's mother flew in from Atlanta and arrived at hour 3 and sat beside her daughter and held her hand and said very little, which was the most useful thing any person could do in that room. Mu-jin stayed at the edge of the space Zuri needed, which was the appropriate distance, close enough that she could see him when she needed the anchor of another person's steadiness, far enough that he was not making her labor about his presence. He had understood, somehow, that his job in that room was to be useful rather than significant. At one point, around hour 9, when the pain had reached the register that strips away everything non-essentials and leaves only the animal core of a person, Zuri grabbed his hand. Not gently, he did not move, he did not speak. He held her grip without flinching and let her use the pressure of it for whatever she needed. And when she released him, his hand had the red marks of her fingers across the back of it, and he looked at them once, and then looked back at her face. "Still here," he said. That was all. She looked at him through the specific altered consciousness of that stage of labor, the place where the normal filters are gone, and you see things with unusual clarity, precisely because all your resources are committed elsewhere. She saw a man who had traveled an enormous distance from the person who had stood in a penthouse and torn a photograph in half. She saw a man who had not finished traveling. She saw both of those things simultaneously and held them without trying to resolve them into one clean image. "Don't let go," she said. "I won't," he said. He didn't. Senna Amani Kong entered the world at 6:42 in the morning, crying with the full-throated conviction of someone who had opinions and intended to express them. The sound was extraordinary, not beautiful in the way the word is used lightly. Beautiful in the way of something that is simultaneously overwhelming and completely precise, a sound that meant exactly one thing. And that thing was, "I am here. I am real. I have arrived." The nurse placed her on Zuri's chest. Zuri felt the weight of her daughter for the first time, the specific, improbable weight of a whole separate person, and something inside her that had been held tense for 8 months released, all at once, so completely that she felt it physically, a deep interior unlocking, and she made a sound that was not a word and put both hands around her daughter's small back. Sina's face was red and furious and absolutely perfect. She was, undeniably, both of them. The nose was Mu-jin, she could see it already, the particular shape of it. The mouth, the set of the jaw, Zuri saw her own mother in it, and her own face in the bathroom mirror, and something else that was simply Senna and no one else. "Hello," Zuri said. Her voice was wrecked. She didn't care. "Hi. I know you. I've known you for 9 months." Senna continued to express her opinions about the situation. "I know," Zuri said. "I know. You're right. It's a lot." She looked up. Mu-jin was standing at the edge of the space, and his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not crying the way he'd cried at the anatomy scan, past any visible version of emotion, into something that had no performance left in it at all. A man looking at his daughter for the first time, with an expression that she would remember for the rest of her life, because she had never seen anyone look at anything the way he was looking at Sina. She held out her arm. He came forward. The nurse guided him through cutting the cord. His hands were shaking, visible from across the room. And then, when the first necessary things were done, Senna had been briefly assessed and declared furiously healthy, the nurse asked if he wanted to hold her. He looked at Zuri. She nodded. He sat in the chair beside her bed, and the nurse placed Senna against his chest, and he put both arms around his daughter with the extreme, almost frightened care of a man who was afraid of his own strength. Senna immediately stopped crying. She made one small sound, adjusted herself against him, with the efficient authority of a newborn who had already begun evaluating her environment, and went quiet. The room was very still. Mu-jin looked down at her. He said her name. Just her name. Very quietly. The way you say something you have been waiting to say for longer than you had words for. Sina. She did not respond. She was 3 minutes old and had no capacity to respond. She simply existed against his chest, warm and absolute, her whole body rising and falling with her own small breathing. He looked up at Zuri. She looked back at him. There was nothing to say in that moment. She knew it, and he knew it. Some moments close around themselves and resist language, because language is a tool for building meaning, and the meaning was already complete. Zuri's mother was crying quietly in the corner, holding Aaliyah's hand. Nadine was looking at the wall with great professional interest. Zuri lay back against the pillow and let herself rest for the first time in 14 hours, and felt the particular radical peace of something being over and something beginning, simultaneously, in the same breath. She went home 4 days later. Her apartment had been, she noticed this, when she walked in carefully restocked. Refrigerator, pantry, the specific things on the list she had given Aaliyah, but arranged with a thoroughness that exceeded Aaliyah's organizational style. She didn't ask. She assumed correctly that Mu-jin had given someone extremely specific instructions. She made a mental note to address the boundary. Then she looked at Senna in the car seat carrier in the middle of her living room floor, where she had set her down to take off her coat, and she forgot the mental note entirely. Senna was asleep. She slept the way newborns sleep completely, with the total commitment of a person for whom consciousness is still an extraordinary effort. Her face in sleep was not furious. It was soft and very still, and so new that looking at it felt like trespassing on something private. Zuri stood in her living room in her coat. She thought about October, the bathroom floor, the cold tile at 5 in the morning. She thought, look what we did. She took her coat off. She sat on sa couch, within arm's reach of the carrier, and she sat there for a while, in the quiet of her apartment, with her daughter sleeping and Chicago doing whatever Chicago was doing outside in her own body, beginning the long work of recovery. She was tired in a way she had no previous reference for. She was also underneath the exhaustion, something she would only later find the word for, complete. Not in the sense of finished, in the sense of having all the necessary parts present. She called her father. She's home, she said when he answered. She heard him exhale the specific exhale of a man who had been waiting for that sentence. Good, he said. Tell me about her. She told him about her. The months that followed were not easy. She had not expected them to be. She was a nurse. She understood the physiology of postpartum recovery, the sleep mathematics of a newborn, the way a new parent's cognitive function degrades in direct proportion to the hours of uninterrupted sleep they are not getting. She had the textbook knowledge. The textbook, she discovered, was significantly less adequate than advertised. Senna was a person who had strong preferences from the first week and expressed them without ambiguity. She disliked being put down while she was awake. She had a specific kind of hunger cry that was distinct from her tired cry and her overstimulated cry, and learning the differences consumed the first 3 weeks entirely. She slept in chunks that felt like cruel jokes. Zuri did not perform competence. This was something she had decided before Sina arrived, that she would not perform competence to protect anyone else's comfort, because Sina deserved a mother who was honest rather than impressive. So she admitted to Aaliyah that she had cried over spilled breast milk on a Tuesday night, and the crying had very little to do with the milk. She admitted to her mother, over the phone, that there were hours when she looked at her daughter and felt nothing but a desperate need for 4 consecutive hours of sleep, and that this felt like a confession of something terrible and was probably just biology. Her mother said, "Baby, that's just what it is. It passes." When? Not as soon as you need it to. Zuri laughed. It was a tired laugh, but it was real. Mu-jin was present in ways she continued to assess and adjust. He came every evening for the first 2 weeks. Not to take over, he had learned not to take over, but to be available. He held Senna so Zuri could shower, eat a real meal, sit in a room alone for 30 minutes, which turned out to be a fundamental human requirement that sleep deprivation stripped to its true necessity. He learned Sena's rhythms with the focused attention he applied to everything, and within 10 days, he could identify the hunger cry as reliably as Zuri could, and he changed diapers without commentary and did the 3A. walk through the apartment when it was his turn without complaint. He was not seamless at it. There sound like when nothing worked, and Zuri could see him trying to manage the helplessness of it, the specific torture of a person who solves problems, being confronted with a problem that has no immediate solution. She watched him work through that, watched him choose, consistently, to stay in the discomfort rather than retreat from it. She did not praise him for doing the minimum. She also did not withhold the acknowledgement that the minimum, done consistently and without resentment, was its own form of evidence. He was building something. She could see it. She was building something too. 6 weeks after Senna was born, Mu-jin did something she hadn't expected. He came to her apartment on a Sunday afternoon. Senna was asleep against his chest, which had become her preferred location during the afternoon, a preference that both Mu-jin and Zuri had stopped questioning, and he set a folder on the table. "The legal restructuring is complete," he said. "The 4 contractual withdrawals are done." Zuri looked at the folder, all 4, yes. The last one closed Friday. She opened the folder. It was documents formal, dense, the kind of paperwork that represented enormous decisions, reduced to signatures. She was not a lawyer, but she could read well enough to understand the shape of what she was looking at. Kang Meridian Shipping remained. The international freight company, the legitimate architecture of it remained intact and was, from what she could read, now operating exclusively within the bounds of what it claimed to be. The rest of it, the contractual relationships, the adjacent networks, the parts that had created generations of enemies and 14 years of leverage for a woman named Han Seo-rin, gone. "Jun Seo," she said. "Is he all right with this?" "Jun Seo has been running legitimate freight operations for 17 years alongside everything else," Mu-jin said. "He's fine. He's also, I think, relieved." "Did he say that?" "Jun Seo doesn't say things like that. But he smiled when I told him the last one was done. For Jun Chiso, that's a declaration." Zuri closed the folder. She looked at Mu-jin, at Senna asleep against him. At the two of them in her living room on a Sunday afternoon, the Korean shipping magnate who had spent 20 years building something dangerous and was now, piece by piece, dismantling it with his daughter's weight against his chest. "Why did you show me this?" she said. "Because you should know," he said. "Not because it entitles me to anything. Because you have had full information about the difficult parts, and this is part of the story, and you deserve to have it." She looked at him for a long time. "Do you know what you're giving up?" she said. Not rhetorically, concretely. "Yes, and you're not doing it because I asked." "I would have done it if you'd asked," he said. "But you didn't." "I'm doing it because I looked at a face on an ultrasound monitor and understood something I hadn't understood before." She waited. "Power is easy to build," he said. "Holding on to something worth holding, that's the thing I never figured out. Because every time I got close to something that mattered, I built a wall around it, instead of standing inside it." He looked at Sina. "I'm done building walls." Zuri looked at her daughter. At the rise and fall of Senna's small chest. At the hands, Mu-jin's hands, which had torn a photograph and collected the pieces and shaken in an ultrasound room and cut a cord, and now held a 6-week-old person with the particular gentleness of someone who was afraid, constantly, of not being careful enough. "I'm going to ask you something," Zuri said, "and I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you think I want it answered." "Yes. Do you think we can actually do this?" She kept her eyes on Senna. "Not the co-parenting arrangement, not the logistics. The actual thing, whatever this is between us. Do you think it survives everything that's happened?" The room was quiet. Senna's chest rose and fell. "I think it already has," Mu-jin said. "Whether it continues to, that depends on both of us. Every day. Not as a grand decision, as a series of small ones." She turned to look at him. "That's an honest answer," she said. "You ask for one." She thought about October. The penthouse. The photograph torn in half and then put back together with tape. The coffee shop in Lincoln Park. The estate outside the city. The kitchen table and the folder with the photograph of his father's face. The maternity ward at 6:42 in the morning. The living room at 2 a.m. with the tea and the pull-out couch. A series of small decisions, every single one of them. "Move your things into the guest room," she said. "Not my bedroom." The guest room. On a trial basis that I will define the terms of and can revoke at any time. He looked at her. My apartment stays mine, she said. I keep my name on the lease. I keep my career. I keep my independence. Senna's decisions are made by both of us, equally. Your money does not create obligation in this household, and you do not make unilateral choices about our daughter's life. Yes, he said, and we go slowly. Not because I don't trust you. She paused. Not only because of that. Because Senna needs parents who have built something real, and real things take time. And I'm not willing to rush it to make any of this feel resolved before it is. I understand, do you? Yes. He held her gaze. I'll earn it. Yes, she said. You will. She stood up and took Sina from his arms, the transfer between them that they had already begun to make automatic, the passing of this small person back and forth like she belonged to both of them, which she did, and she carried Sina to the nursery and put her down in the white crib under the taped photograph on the wall, the 10-week ultrasound, with the tape lines showing the first image that had ever existed of the person who was now sleeping beneath it. She stood over the crib. Senna slept. In the living room, she could hear Mu-jin moving, not taking over the space, just being in it. She heard him pick up something, a toy that had fallen, and set it on the table. She heard him sit down. He was staying. She stood over her daughter's crib and thought about everything it had taken to arrive at this room. At this moment, at this specific Sunday afternoon with the city outside and the man in the living room, and the baby breathing quietly in the white crib. She thought about the bathroom floor. She thought about Aliyah sitting across from her in the kitchen saying, "What do you need?" She thought about the heartbeat in the ultrasound room and Mu-jin's shaking hands. She thought about the estate kitchen and the photograph of his father, and the moment she had said, "Then that's where we start," and meant it in every direction at once. She thought about labor, the 14 hours of it, the handhold that left marks, the words still here, and the fact that he hadn't let go. She thought, none of this has been erased. She thought that's the point. She didn't want it erased. She wanted it present, the whole true weight of it, every difficult inch. Because they had gotten here not by pretending the difficult parts hadn't happened, but by going through them one at a time and arriving on the other side still standing. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. She had never needed Mu-jin to be someone who didn't make mistakes. She had needed him to be someone who knew the difference between explaining a mistake and excusing it. Who could sit across a table in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park and hear the full cost of what he'd done, without negotiating her down to a smaller version of it. Who could receive a correction and act on it without requiring her to be grateful for his compliance. He was not done becoming that person. Neither was she. They would both be doing that work for the rest of their lives, becoming, failing at it, correcting, continuing. The way everyone did. The way people who had not destroyed and rebuilt things never had to understand. She bent down and touched Senna's cheek, very lightly. The softest possible contact, just to feel the warmth of her. Senna slept on undisturbed. "We did it," Zuri said. Quietly, only for the room. "You and me, we did it." She straightened up. She looked at the taped photograph on the wall for a moment. Then she went back to the living room, where Mu-jin was sitting on the couch, and she sat at the other end of it. And, outside the window, the Chicago afternoon was doing what it always did, pressing on. Complicated and enormous, and completely certain of its own continuation. And for a while they simply sat there together. Two people in a room that had not been built for them, but had become through everything, theirs. "Tell me something true," Zuri said. He looked at her. "I'm afraid every day," he said, "of repeating it. The thing I did to you, the wall, the distance." He paused. "I'm afraid I'll get frightened again and I'll reach for the control instead of for you." She held his gaze. "I know you're afraid of it," she said. "So am I. Of the same thing?" "Of different things," she said. "I'm afraid of building something and losing myself inside it. Of waking up one day and realizing I traded my independence for proximity." She looked at the window. "I've been afraid of that since October. Every time something made me want to stop being careful, I was afraid it meant I was losing myself. And now?" She thought about it. Honestly. "Now I think wanting to stop being careful doesn't mean you're losing yourself," she said. "It means you're making a decision. Those are different things." She looked back at him. I'm making a decision. The room was very quiet. Then Senna, from the nursery, made a sound, not quite crying, the early sound of a person registering awareness of the world from sleep, and Zuri stood up automatically and went to the door, and Mu-jin stood too. A sound like green wood split, and for a moment they were both in the hallway outside the nursery, with the afternoon light coming through, and the small sounds of their daughter waking. I've got her, Zuri said. She went into the nursery. She reached into the crib and picked up Senna, who was in the early stage of deciding whether to commit to being upset or to be distracted by the face above her, and Sina looked up at Zuri with the dark, unfocused gaze of an 8-week-old and made a sound that was not a word but contained a complete sentence. I know, Zuri said. I know, I'm here. She turned around. Mu-jin was in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at Senna. Then he looked at Zuri. Come in, Zuri said. He came into the room. They stood together in the nursery, the warm terracotta walls, the books, the stuffed elephant, the taped photograph on the wall, and Senna looked between them with the examining focus of a person who was already taking inventory of her world and deciding what to make of it. Outside, Chicago did what it always did. Inside, something held. Not perfectly, not without the visible lines of where it had been broken and put back together. Not in any version of the story that erased what it had cost to get here. But it held. And that Zuri understood standing in the room she had built alone, with the man who had learned to stand inside things, instead of surrounding them with walls, and the daughter who had rearranged both of their architectures before she was even born, that was enough. Not because enough meant perfect, because enough meant real. And real, with all its cracks and tape lines and visible repairs, was the only thing she had ever truly wanted to build. She held her daughter. He stood beside her. The afternoon light moved through the window. Senna had completed her initial assessment of the situation, appeared to reach a tentative conclusion. She stopped fussing. She held on to Zuri's finger. She looked at the light.